Did you know, in the books, Arya is only 9 years old when the story begins, while in the TV series, she is 11 or 12 years old. In the books, Arya is not Tywin Lannister's cupbearer, but Roose Bolton's, and actually overhears Roose planning to betray her brother Robb at the Red Wedding, but doesn't realize. Also, in the books, Arya has warged into her direwolf Nymeria, like Bran does with Summer. Lastly, in George's original outline, Arya was supposed to be aged up and in a love triangle with Tyrion and Jon Snow, but this was changed in 1996. The story was supposed to end with Arya and Jon being together after the identity of his parents being revealed. In the books, Myrcella is still set to marry Trystane Martell like in the TV show. However, rather than kill Myrcella, the Sand Snake's plan is to crown Myrcella queen over Tommen since she is older and, in Dawn, age comes before sex. Although, the plan to crown Myrcella is foiled like in the TV show, and during it, Myrcella has her face cut open and she loses an ear and part of her cheek. However, the possibility of crowning Myrcella still remains open and might lead to conflict between Myrcella and Tommen, who is also still alive in the books. Did you know, in the books, Ygritte isn't killed during the battle for Castle Black by Olly? Instead, Ygritte is part of the wildling band that attacks Castle Black, and Jon helps defend the Night's Watch by firing arrows at the approaching wildlings in the dark. Only after the battle is done does Jon find Ygritte beneath the Lord Commander's tower with an arrow between her breasts. Jon doesn't want to believe the arrow was his, but says to himself, "Not mine." He told himself, "Not one of mine," but he felt as if it were. So Jon lives with the constant guilt that he might have been the one who killed her. Did you know that in the books, Robb Stark doesn't marry Talissa, a battlefield medic from Volantis, but instead Jane Westerling, a 16-year-old girl who was also a Lannister bannerman. After learning of Bran and Rickon's fate in Winterfell and recovering from a battle wound, Robb sleeps with Jean, and to preserve the girl's honor, marries her thereafter, which costs him the Frey alliance. Jean is a beautiful girl, but as Jaime describes, not worth losing a kingdom over. She is also still alive in the books, having not been killed at the Red Wedding. She is currently on her way to Castle Rock, since if she were to get pregnant, people could declare her child as heir to Robb Stark's kingdom and rally the North. Did you know that in the books, Theon's torture is actually worse than what it is in the TV show? Because at the end of it, Theon's hair has turned white, his skin has aged dramatically, and people actually mistake him for an old man. Even though we don't see any of the torture in the books, Theon is left in complete darkness when not being tortured, unlike in the show where he just sleeps in the kennel. Theon is also missing more fingers and toes, and it takes a lot more convincing in the book for Reek to betray Ramsay and to become Theon Greyjoy again, while in the show, all it takes is for Sansa to remind him of his own name and ask him to rescue her. Did you know, in the books, Rhaenyra, Daemon, and Laena might have slept with each other? After the birth of their daughters in Pentos, Daemon and Laena returned to High Tide, where Rhaenyra would visit them frequently. It was during this time that Rhaenyra betrothed her two eldest sons, Jace and Luke, to Daemon and Laena's daughters, Baela and Rhaella. So, unlike in the show, Rhaenyra did not offer to betroth her heir and spare to Rhaenys grandchildren in return for Rhaenys' support in the dispute for High Tide, but rather because she was very fond of Laena, who, at the time, was said to be one of the most beautiful women in Westeros. Did you know there are 17 dragons featured in the iconic Dance of the Dragons between Rhaenyra Targaryen's blacks on Dragonstone and Aegon and Alicent Hightower's greens in King's Landing? But who has the most dragons? Well, the Blacks currently have 6 dragon riders, with Syrax bonded to Rhaenyra, Caraxes to Daemon, Vermax to Jace, Meleys to Rhaenys, Moondancer to Baela, and Joffrey to Tyraxes. Meanwhile, the Greens have 4 dragon riders, with Sunfire to Aegon, Vhagar to Aemond, Dreamfire to Helena, and Tessarion to Daeron. However, Rhaenyra's Blacks have another 8 dragons living on Dragonstone: Seasmoke, Laenor's dragon; Stormcloud, Sheepstealer, Vermithor, Jaehaerys' dragon; Silverwing, Queen Elisaine's dragon; Cannibal, Grey Ghost, and Morning. The Blacks have more dragons. Did you know, in the books, the Brotherhood Without Banners didn't sell Gendry off to Melisandre like they did in the show, but instead, Gendry has joined them and is an armourer for them at the Inns at the Crossroads, where he helps Brienne in a fight to the death with some outlaws while looking for Arya. Now, in the books, if Arya were to return to Westeros and seek revenge on House Frey, like in the show, she could bump into him. Or she might run into him in the Riverlands while looking for her wolf, Nymeria. Either way, there is a high chance of them seeing each other again in the books. Did you know, in the books, Bran loves Meera and wants to tell her how he feels, even though he knows she doesn't feel the same way? So, when Bran, Meera, Jojen, Hodor, and Summer reach the cave, and whites start bursting out from under the snow, it looks as though they are about to be surrounded and killed, and Bran thinks to himself, he wondered what Meera would think if he should suddenly tell her that he loved her. However, in the books, Jojen didn't die outside the cave, but instead goes missing in the final Bran chapter of A Dance with Dragons, and fans speculate Jojen might be in the red paste that the children of the forest are giving Bran to eat to awaken his green-seeing powers. Did you know, in the books, Daemon didn't kill his wife, Rhea Royce? This is because, in the book, after her accident, Rhea Royce lingered for 9 days before finally feeling well enough to leave her bed, only to collapse and die within an hour of rising. It would be ridiculous in those 9 days she didn't tell anyone that Daemon attacked her. The showrunner, Ryan Condal, said, Lady Rhea Royce of Runestone fell off her horse and her skull was crushed in the fall. I read that and I was like, that's such a weird detail to include, with no context around it. So I stared at it, and I was like, well, Daemon obviously went home and murdered his wife. But in our opinion, Daemon, the most recognizable guy in Westeros, physically traveling back to the Vale on his dragon and not being seen by anyone makes no sense. Did you know, in the books, Sansa was not meant to marry Loras Tyrell, but his older brother and heir to Highgarden, Willis Tyrell. In the gardens, Marjorie and the Queen of Thorns convinced Sansa she should visit Highgarden and eventually marry Willis, who was crippled after facing off against Oberyn Martell in a tourney. Sansa readily accepts, but unfortunately tells Dontas Hollard the plan, who works for Littlefinger, and he tells the Lannisters, leading to Sansa's abrupt marriage to Tyrion Lannister. In the books, Cersei is also meant to marry Willis, not Loras, like in the show. The reason why Sansa wouldn't marry Loras is because he joins the Kingsguard to protect Marjorie in the book. Did you know, in the books, Daenerys wants to marry Daario and give up her crown to be with him, but thinks to herself he wouldn't like that, since it is a queen that he craves, not her. He also dresses completely different in the books, with shiny gold outfits, and dyes his hair blue with a forked beard and a golden tooth. In the books, Daario is insanely arrogant, and literally all of Daenerys' counselors, including Barristan, have a meeting where they agree it would be better if Daario died in the upcoming battle for Meereen, since he holds way too much influence over Daenerys, and everyone thinks he is too dangerous and violent. Barristan is the only one who begrudgingly stands up for him. Did you know, in the books, Littlefinger genuinely believes that Catelyn loved him and gave him her virginity in secret? This is because after his duel with Brandon, Littlefinger is in bed for a fortnight, recovering, while Lysa takes care of him. During one of these nights, Lysa sleeps with him, but during it, he calls her Cat, thinking it was Catelyn during it, and Lysa doesn't correct him. So, Littlefinger spends the rest of his life convinced that Catelyn loved him, but couldn't be with him because he was too low-born, and the patriarchal norms of Westeros prevented them from being together. So maybe this is Littlefinger's endgame, to create a Westeros where he and Catelyn could have been together. Did you know, in the books, there is actually a good chance Stannis will win the Battle of Ice against the Boltons by using the snowstorm to lure the Bolton forces onto a frozen lake that will crack beneath them and drown half their forces. Moreover, a lot of the Northern Lords are planning to betray the Boltons for Stannis, since in the show, it is kind of ridiculous how everyone just accepts House Bolton's rule after they helped murder their kin at the Red Wedding. and everyone knows Ramsay is a bloodthirsty psychopath. Stannis also has Theon Greyjoy in his possession after his escape from Winterfell, and he gives vital information to Stannis just before the battle begins. Did you know, in the books, there is another Targaryen called Aegon, the son of Elia Martell and Rhaegar Targaryen, who invades Westeros with the Golden Company and the help of Varys. He is planning to marry Daenerys, but there is a theory that he might end up marrying Sansa instead, since, in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, Lady Ashford was promised to a Baratheon, then a Tyrell, then a Lannister, then a Harding, only to end up with a Targaryen. Sansa was promised to a Baratheon, Joffrey, a Tyrell, Willis, a Lannister, Tyrion, a Harding, Harry the Heir, but might end up marrying Aegon Targaryen instead, which means Littlefinger and Varys might team up to put Sansa and Aegon on the Iron Throne. Did you know that in the books, Missandei is a little girl, while in the show they aged her up and got rid of her brothers who appear in the books? However, there is a crazy theory that Missandei is one of the children of the forest because she has golden eyes and dusky skin that somewhat matches what the children of the forest born in Essos would look like. Missandei says she is 11, but everyone thinks she is too intelligent for her age, and she can speak 3 languages. She also claims her brothers taught her to climb trees in a forest-like environment. In Bloodraven's cave, Bran thinks Leaf has a sweet voice that sounds like music, and people say the same of Missandei's voice. Did you know, in the books, Sansa thinks her first kiss was with the Hound during the Battle of Blackwater? However, this never occurred, but Sansa tells herself in A Psalm of Swords she wondered what Maegor would think about kissing the Hound as she had. He'd come to her the night of the battle stinking of wine and blood. He kissed me and threatened to kill me and made me sing him a song. However, George has confirmed that the kiss never happened and that this will mean something in a later book. It also reveals that Sansa Stark is an unreliable narrator and might not be trustworthy. If the Hound and Sansa reunite in the books, it will be interesting to see how this plays out. Did you know, in the books, there was a discussion of who Catelyn would marry after Ned's death? This is because, in the books, Catelyn is in her mid-30s and even says to herself that she's still able to have more children, and it looks as though Robb plans to marry her off to Lord Jason Mallister by sending her to Seaguard after the Red Wedding. There she would be his guest. But obviously in time, the two would marry because Catelyn does find Jason Mallister quite attractive. His hair had as much white in it as brown, but the Lord of Seaguard was a handsome man. However, one hilarious candidate for Catelyn to marry was Theon Greyjoy, which could have been one of the most hilarious couples in Game of Thrones history. Did you know, in the books, the Stark children were all aged up 2 to 3 years? For example, Robb and Jon both go from 14 to 17, while Sansa is aged up from 11 to 13, and Arya from 9 to 11, while Bran is aged up from 7 to 10, and Rickon from just 3 to 6. Ned and Catelyn Stark are also both aged up from their mid-30s to their early 40s. They also look quite different in the books, with the exception of Ned, Arya, and Jon Snow. The Starks all have red hair from their mother, Catelyn. This is also another reason why Catelyn dislikes Jon, because he resembles Ned more than any of the boys she gave birth to. Did you know, in the books, there is a massive conspiracy that the Maesters are trying to wipe out all the Targaryens, and the show hints at this, with Grand Maester Mellos always siding with Otto Hightower. You can see the two of them are always exchanging looks, and Mellos is thought to be responsible for making Viserys sick, until Grand Maester Orwyle stopped the leechings and gave Viserys proper medicine. The last massive piece of evidence comes from the letter Luke gave Bormund Baratheon. It's believed the Storm's End Maester deliberately twisted the words in the letter to turn Baratheon against Rhaenyra by misrepresenting its contents to stir anger in Bormund, and this would lead to the tragic death of Luke and spark the devastating Dance of the Dragons. Did you know, in the books, Cersei is one of the most beautiful women in Westeros, and only in her mid-30s.
However, as a child, Maggie the Frog gave her a prophecy that haunts her throughout the books. Queen you shall be, until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and take all that you hold dear. Cersei thinks this queen is Marjorie, which is why Cersei schemes to have her arrested. However, Marjorie is never described as being as beautiful as Cersei. The only other character considered as beautiful as Cersei is Sansa. Cersei thinks Sansa is a stupid girl, but maybe Sansa will blindside Cersei to cast her down and take all that she holds dear in the final book to become Queen of Westeros herself. Did you know, in the books, Rickon is still alive and on the island of Skagos, where people are known to feast on human flesh? Davos has been sent to smuggle Rickon out of Skagos so he can become the new Lord of Winterfell after Stannis defeats the Boltons with the North's help. However, there are fears that when he returns, like his wolf, Rickon will have developed a taste for human meat and become more wolf than human. This could lead to conflict between Rickon and Sansa over who should inherit Winterfell, with Stannis and the Northern Lords supporting Rickon and Littlefinger and the Vale supporting Sansa. They could also both end up supporting different kings or queens to inherit the Iron Throne. Did you know, in the books, Criston Cole didn't kill Joffrey Lonmouth at the wedding, like we saw in the TV show? Instead, there was a tourney to celebrate Rhaenyra and Laenor's wedding, where for the first time, Criston Cole wasn't Rhaenyra's sworn shield, but instead, it was Harwin Strong. This is after Criston asked Rhaenyra to run away with him and she refused. So, probably in retaliation, Criston Cole asked to wear Alicent Hightower's favour, which she gave, and this is what he wore when he killed Joffrey Lonmouth during the tourney. This can be seen as Criston Cole cementing himself as a Green supporter by killing Joffrey and afterward Alicent asking for Criston to be her sworn shield. Did you know, in the books, there is a theory that Daemon slept with Alicent Hightower in secret when she was very young and took her maidenhead? Otto Hightower found out, and this is what caused him to despise Daemon throughout his tenure as Hand, and why, in episode 1 of House of the Dragon, he was so eager to disinherit Daemon as heir for Rhaenyra, and arguably, this is what caused the Dance of the Dragons. However, had Daemon not married Ray Royce, and instead married Alicent Hightower, she would have given him dragon-riding children, like she did for Viserys, and we could have still had a Targaryen civil war between Daemon and Alicent's children against Rhaenyra and Laenor's children. However, we don't think Daemon would war against Rhaenyra, but maybe his children would after he dies, similar to what happened after Viserys died. Did you know, in the books, there was a Lord Commander of the Night's Watch who married another? However, the Starks of Winterfell and the King Beyond the Wall united together to defeat him. The name of this Lord Commander is lost, but it is believed that he might have been a Stark. However, it's theorized that this Lord Commander was trying to broker peace with the others by uniting their people with the White Walkers, but was destroyed before he could do so, and his reputation was blackened, so he would be known only as the Night Kings forever after, and a traitor to the Night's Watch. But maybe this is what Jon will do to stop the others from invading Westeros, brokering a peace with them through a marriage pact. Did you know, in the books, there is a wildling princess called Val, that even many High Lords in Stannis' army are trying to marry because she is so beautiful? When Stannis offers Jon Winterfell, he does it on the condition that Jon also marry Val to unite the wildlings to his cause. Having to marry Val makes the offer that much more tempting, but he still refuses. However, Val even invites Jon to try and steal her away from her tower that Stannis keeps her, which is the wildling tradition of making someone your wife. She is actually the one who Jon sends to find Tormund and bring his wildling forces through the wall. And after Jon hopefully gets resurrected in the books, it remains to be seen what will happen to Val. Did you know, in the books, Tyrion didn't murder Tywin because he was sleeping with Shae, but rather because after his release, Jaime revealed to Tyrion that his first wife, Tysha, wasn't a whore that Jaime had paid, but actually married Tyrion out of love. This is why Tyrion confronts Tywin. He tells his father not to use the word whore, because they are discussing Tysha, not Shae. And when Tywin calls Tysha a whore, which she wasn't, Tyrion snaps and kills his father. However, fans speculate that Sam meets Tysha in Braavos, where she is a whore who will only sleep with you after you pretend to marry her. And she has a 14-year-old daughter named Lana, who also works at the brothel and is the right age to be Tyrion's daughter. Did you know in the books, Cersei and Jaime started fooling around before they were teenagers? And their mum, Joanna Lannister, found out and separated them in Castle Rock. However, she died shortly after when giving birth to Tyrion. Tywin supposedly never found out about the incest. This is actually why Jaime joined the Kingsguard, because he and Cersei thought she was going to marry Rhaegar Targaryen, and this was a way for them to be close to each other. However, Cersei had every intention of forgetting Jaime to be with Rhaegar, who she thought was the most handsome man alive. However, one crazy theory is that Tywin did find out about the incest from Joanna, but refused to believe it, and deep down knows Joffrey, Marcella, and Tommen are born of incest, but can't admit it to himself. Did you know in the books, it was Rhaenyra who approached Daemon about how to have fun outside of marriage, and he agreed to show her the brothels of King's Landing. This is because Rhaenyra wanted to seduce her sworn shield, Criston Cole, who in the books only saw her as a child, since that's what she was when he started protecting her. Daemon supposedly taught Rhaenyra all the ways to seduce a man. Mushroom describes lewd tales of them flying to empty rocks and disrobing in front of each other to learn the acts of pleasuring. However, Rhaenyra never slept with her uncle, since she was saving her maidenhead for Criston Cole. Eventually she and Daemon were caught in bed by Aric Cargyle, and this is why Viserys exiled Daemon and forced Rhaenyra to marry Laenor Valyrion, or be disinherited. Did you know in the books, Robert Baratheon confessed to Ned that he knew his son was a monster? During the Hands tourney, when the two of them are alone, Robert tells Ned, "I am sorry for your girl, Ned. Truly, about the wolf I mean. My son was lying. I'd stake my soul on it." Robert even admits he wants to give up the throne and become a sellsword in the Free Cities. However, the thought of Joffrey on the throne with Cersei whispering in his ear stops him. He says, "My son, how could I have made a son like that, Ned?" Honestly, Ned should have realized sooner that Joffrey was a bastard when you look at all the book evidence. For example, in the books, Joffrey is really tall and slim, just like Jaime. Did you know in the books, Theon might become king of the Iron Islands with a bastard son to replace him on the Sea Stone chair? So, in A Clash of Kings, or Season 2 of Game of Thrones, Theon journeys to the Iron Islands to convince his father to side with Robb Stark, and on the way, he sleeps with the captain's daughter, who expects she will be disowned after sleeping with him repeatedly. Theon doesn't think twice about her, but she might be pregnant with his child, and in which case, Theon can overthrow Euron for King of the Iron Islands, since, in the book, he wasn't there when Euron won the Kingsmoot, unlike in the show. And a true-born son of the previous king can nullify a Kingsmoot according to the laws of the Iron Islands. Did you know in the TV series, the Lannister characters were all aged up at least 5 years? For example, Jaime and Cersei Lannister are both 31 in the books, but at least 36 in the TV show. Tyrion is aged up from 24 in the books to 32. Tywin Lannister is around 55 in the books, but is 64 in the show. Joffrey is 11 or 12 in the books, but aged up to 16. The same way Marcella is 7 in the books and 10 in the show, only to be aged up again to 16 in Season 5. The same thing happens to Tommen, who was 6 in the books and 8 in the show, only to be aged up to 14 in Season 4. Lancel is 16 in the books, but the actor who plays him is 30. Who sent the Catspaw to kill Bran in Episode 2? The show actually gives no answer to this question, despite the fact it causes the War of the Five Kings. Now, in the books, Tyrion thinks it was Joffrey because of some very circumstantial evidence. However, One theory suggests it was Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, who told Jon when he first met him that he was at Winterfell for the feast with King Robert and that he brought a bag of silver with him. In the books, Robb Stark tells Catelyn that the cat's paw had a bag of silver on him as payment. So why did Mance do it? To start a war between the Starks and Lannisters, so the Starks would march south, leaving the north unprotected. Because throughout history, every king beyond the wall has failed to reach the south by a Stark army waiting to defeat them. Did you know, in the books, Bran's warging of Hodor is actually disgusting and horrific? This is how Bran describes it in his own words. The big stable boy no longer fought him as he had the first time, like a dog who has had all the fight whipped out of him. Hodor would curl up and hide whenever Bran reached out for him. His hiding place was somewhere deep within him, a pit where not even Bran could touch him. Bran even boasts of his ability to walk into Hodor without anyone realizing. No one knew when he was wearing Hodor's skin. Bran only had to smile, do as he was told, and mutter Hodor from time to time, and he could follow Meera and Jojen grinning happily without anyone suspecting it was really him. This might eventuate in Bran doing some pretty horrific stuff in the books. Did you know in episode 1, the characters of House of the Dragon had completely different ages? For example, Rhaenyra was 8 in the books, but 14 in the show. Alicent was 17 in the books, but was aged down to be Rhaenyra's age. Viserys was 28 in the books, but aged up into his mid-40s for the show. Daemon was 24 in the books, but in his mid-30s for the show. Aemma Targaryen was 23 in the books, but aged up into her early 40s. What this means is that in the books, Aemma was only 15 when she gave birth to Rhaenyra. However, before Rhaenyra, she had already been pregnant multiple times. This is because Viserys desperately wanted an heir for when he challenged Rhaenys for the Iron Throne at the Great Council, which is why the show had Aemma pregnant during the scene. Did you know in the books, Loras kind of rejected Sansa in a really funny way? On Sansa's way to meet Margaery and the Queen of Thorns for the first time, she is escorted by Loras, which thrills Sansa, and she spends all her time thinking about the hands tourney where he gave her a red rose. However, when Sansa brings this up to Loras, he literally has no memory of it, and it hits Sansa like a cold bucket of water. She tries to get him to remember, but this brings up Renly, and Sansa says how horrible it must have been for Margaery when her husband died. However, this angers Loras because Margaery only wanted a crown, and it was Loras who actually loved Renly. He doesn't talk to her for the rest of the trip, and Sansa thinks to herself, she is a stupid girl. Did you know in the books, there is a theory that Littlefinger is deliberately bankrupting the realm and many of the major lords, so that way they'll be personally indebted to him and the Vale, which is the only part besides Dorne that was unaffected by the War of the Five Kings. Moreover, Littlefinger can lay claim to both the North and Riverlands through Sansa, with the Knights of the Vale to support her claim. She could also marry a Targaryen, like Aegon or Jon Snow, to claim the Iron Throne, with 3 of the 7 kingdoms supporting them. However, should Littlefinger succeed, it seems only right that someone would tell Sansa how Littlefinger betrayed Ned back in King's Landing, and like in the show, Littlefinger's undoing will be his creepy obsession and love for Sansa Stark. Did you know in the books, Christian Cole was actually a really interesting character compared to his show counterpart? In the book, he is called the Kingmaker because he is the one who makes Aegon king over Rhaenyra, whereas the show had it be mostly Otto and Alicent. The show also removed his Kingmaker speech, where he says, "7 save the realm if we seat a bastard on the Iron Throne. They will turn the Red Keep into a brothel. No man's daughter will be safe. Even the boys." We know what Laenor was. Beesbury calls them all traitors, and Criston coolly walks behind him and opens his throat, which is a way better end for Beesbury than in the show. It was also Criston who convinced Prince Aegon to take the Iron Throne, saying that he and his siblings would be killed by Rhaenyra if he did not. Did you know, in the books, the Faceless Assassins took Arya's eyesight away so she could awaken her warging abilities, similar to Bran? For example, in the show, Arya got her vision back after she learned to fight without her eyesight. However, In the books, Arya accomplishes this by walking into a nearby cat, so that way she can use the cat's eyes to fight back against her opponents. It seems as though darkness improves warging abilities, which is why Bran spent weeks in a coma to unlock his warging abilities, and Bloodraven lives underground, similar to Eleven in Stranger Things. This might be why the Faceless Assassins want her, so she can carry out assassinations through animals, like killing King Robert by warging into a boar, which people suspect Bloodraven of doing in order to start the War of the Five Kings. Did you know in the books, Daenerys loses her hair after birthing the 3 dragons? This results in her having short hair throughout her time in Qarth, where her dragons aren't even stolen, like in the show. That whole plotline was made up, and Xaro is still alive in the books, and actually treats with Daenerys in Meereen on behalf of Qarth. So Doria doesn't even betray Daenerys and help steal her dragons. Instead, she actually dies on the way to Qarth of a wasting sickness. She was also Lyseni in the books, which means she looks like Daenerys, but the showrunners decided not to have 2 silver-haired girls among the Dothraki, and the Lyseni, who are Valyrian-looking people, are completely cut from the show to give the impression that Daenerys and Viserys are the very last of the silver-haired, dragon-riding Valyrians of old. Did you know in the books, it might not have been Olenna Tyrell and Littlefinger who murdered Joffrey, since in the books, Joffrey's murder is made to look like a choking and resembles nothing like what was shown in the TV show? It's only when Cersei accuses Tyrion and an autopsy later proves there was no food in Joffrey's throat that Tyrion is charged with murder. However, why put choking poison in the wine goblet that Joffrey and, incidentally, Marjorie were both drinking from in the books? What makes more sense is putting it in the pie. However, Joffrey doesn't eat his pie in the books. Instead, he eats Tyrion's, and it's only after eating Tyrion's pie that Joffrey starts to choke. Meaning Tyrion was Littlefinger's target, not Joffrey, since after Tyrion's death, Sansa would be free to marry anyone. But as of right now, Littlefinger isn't free to marry Sansa off until Tyrion officially dies. Did you know in the books, there is a theory that it wasn't Rhaegar who went after Lyanna, but the other way around? This is because Lyanna didn't want to marry Robert Baratheon and saw him as her captor, not a husband. And Lyanna convinced Rhaegar to run away with her because he was obsessed with prophecy, and together they could birth the prince that was promised. So there was actually nothing romantic about Robert rebelling to be with Lyanna, since she even told Ned she didn't want to be with him. This might also be the reason why Benjen was forced to join the Night's Watch, since he allowed Lyanna to run away with Rhaegar, and this caused the death of Ned's older brother Brandon and their father. So Benjen is at the Wall to make up for allowing Robert's rebellion to happen. Did you know in the books, Dany and Jon's stories mirror each other? For example, in Book 1, Jon and Dany arrive at a new place where they must call home for the rest of their lives, i.e. the Wall and the Dothraki Sea. In Book 2, they venture out into extreme conditions on a perilous journey. Dany goes into the Red Waste and Qarth, while Jon ventures north of the Wall and is captured by wildlings. In Book 3, both of them rise up into positions of power, with Dany conquering 3 cities and becoming Queen of Meereen, while Jon defends the Wall against a wildling army and becomes Lord Commander. Book 5 has Dany and Jon dealing with the burden of ruling justly, and ultimately, both of them are unable to achieve what they would like, which might signify Dany and Jon becoming more ruthless and destructive in Book 6, The Winds of Winter. Did you know in the books, it looks as though Varys is a secret Targaryen? This is the reason why he shaves his head, and why someone purchased him to practice blood magic, since there is power in king's blood, i.e. Targaryen blood. However, Varys is descended from the Blackfyres, the bastard branch of the Targaryen family. In the books, it looks as though his plan is to put his nephew Aegon Targaryen, who claims to be the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, but is actually a secret Blackfyre, on to the Iron Throne. However, the people assisting Aegon despise Varys, such as Jon Connington, who might order Varys' death. Aegon might agree to it, since Varys is a stranger to him who served King Robert, and Varys might willingly go to his own death rather than reveal to Aegon that he is a Blackfyre pretender and his only beloved nephew. Did you know in the show, Highgarden was super unimpressive compared to its book counterpart? Unlike in the show, the castle is supposed to be surrounded by 3 rings of white stone, with each fortified wall increasing in height the further you go in. Between the outer and middle walls is a famous briar labyrinth, which serves to entertain as well as slow invaders. Highgarden is supposed to be the richest seat in all of Westeros, and can field an army of 100,000, compared to the Lannisters who can only field 60,000. So, when Olenna tells Jaime that House Tyrell were never good fighters, it completely ignores Renly saying he had 100,000 men back in Season 2 of the show. Also, why wouldn't House Tyrell keep their army inside their walls and wait for Daenerys to arrive with her dragons and army to attack the besieging Lannister forces, like how Robb defeated Jaime in Season 1 at Riverrun? Did you know in the books, when Theon murdered the 2 Miller's boys in order to pretend that they were Bran and Rickon Stark, Theon already knew the Miller's wife for many years? He had been sneaking out of Winterfell to sleep with her around the same time that the 2 Miller's boys were conceived, meaning that the 2 boys Theon murders might have been his own sons. Ramsay was also in the dungeon when Theon seized Winterfell, and it was his idea to use the 2 Miller boys who weren't burnt like in the show, but skinned alive or flayed, which is something Ramsay is very good at to hide their identity. So it wasn't the Ironborn who sacked and burnt Winterfell down, but Ramsay and his Bolton men, and afterwards blamed the Ironborn for destroying the symbol of Stark power in the north, allowing the Boltons to become the new Wardens of the North. Did you know in the books, Lyonel Strong might have conspired to help Viserys win the Great Council of 101 to become king over Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was? The evidence for this comes from the fact that the vote is absurdly one-sided towards Viserys, despite the fact that the North, the Valyrians, and the Baratheons supported Rhaenys. We are told the vote was 20-1 in Viserys' favour, but how is that possible with 2 of the 6 kingdoms plus all the Valyrian allies voting for Rhaenys? Instead, the Lord of Harrenhal, Lyonel Strong, might have conspired with the maesters who tallied the votes to skewer the results towards Viserys. As a reward, Lyonel was then placed on Viserys' small council 4 years later, and would eventually become Hand of the King, since Viserys knew he could trust him. Did you know in the books, Sansa's hair is more red and she has deep blue eyes that she got from her mother? Even though she is only 11 years old at the start of A Game of Thrones, she is already described as tall, graceful, and womanly. However, when Littlefinger brings her to the Vale, she has to dye her hair black and pretend to be his bastard daughter, which also makes her the heir to Harrenhal, one of the richest seats in the Riverlands. There are people who are suspicious of Sansa, and she lets slip she knows the bastard of Winterfell is Jon Snow, which is something the bastard of Littlefinger would have no way of knowing. She also thinks it would be nice to see Jon again. Littlefinger plans to eventually reveal Sansa to the Knights of the Vale, but he needs to wait for Tyrion to die before he can marry her off. Did you know in the books, Catelyn Stark is resurrected like Beric Dondarrion, and she leads the Brotherhood without banners. Catelyn now goes by the name Lady Stoneheart, and she spends the last 2 books hanging every Frey she can get her hands on. Eventually, Brienne is captured by the Brotherhood, and she comes face to face with the woman she pledged her loyalty to. Stoneheart commands Brienne to bring Jaime to them to be hanged, but she refuses, and so Stoneheart orders Brienne, Podrick, and Hyle Hunt to be hanged instead. However, as Brienne sees Podrick not even fight as he is strung up to be killed, Brienne calls out, "Sword," and agrees to kill Jaime. The last we see of Jaime is him being led into the woods by Brienne, claiming to have found Sansa, but that he has to come alone or the Hound will kill her. However, we don't think Brienne is going to hand Jaime over to die in the books. Did you know in the books, Castle Rock is carved out of a colossal stone hill beside the Sunset Sea? According to George R.R. Martin, the rock is 6 miles long and its peak is about 2,100 feet high, which makes it 3 times higher than the wall. The entire stronghold, tunnels, storerooms, halls, stables, courtyards, mines, wells, and bedchambers lie within the rock itself. According to George, this makes Castle Rock the strongest and most impregnable seat in all of Westeros. The Lion's Mouth, the main entry to Castle Rock, is an enormous natural cavern reaching 200 feet high, located on the south face of the rock. There are sea gates at the base of the castle, but the bulk of the Lannister fleet anchors in the harbour of Lannisport. However, this fleet was set ablaze by the Ironborn during Balon Greyjoy's first rebellion, where afterwards Theon became a ward of the Starks. How big are the army sizes in Westeros? We'll use the books since the show has very few numbers and is incredibly inconsistent with those very same numbers. So here we go. The North can muster 50,000 men, which is similar to the Lannisters, who can also muster 50,000. The Reach, or Tyrells, can muster the most, from 80 to 100,000 men. The next biggest is probably the Riverlands at 45 to 50,000, who unfortunately have no strategic defenses and are completely surrounded. The Vale can muster 45,000 men and are untouched after the War of the Five Kings. The same as Dorne are untouched, but they only have 25 to 30,000 men, with their land being mostly desert. The Stormlands can muster at least 40,000, but are the most ravaged and depleted after the war. The Iron Islands can muster anything from 20 to 30,000 men. Did you know in the books, Catelyn thought Jon Snow's mother was Ashara Dane, one of the most beautiful women in the realm and a lady-in-waiting to Rhaelar Targaryen, Daenerys' mother. This is because Ashara danced with the Starks at the tourney of Harrenhal, where Rhaegar and Lyanna first met each other. However, it seems more likely that Ned's older brother Brandon was the one who slept with Ashara Dane, and she threw herself from a tower after her brother, Arthur Dane, died at the Tower of Joy fighting Ned. However, Robert believes Jon's mother is Wyla, a fisherman's daughter who helped Ned reach the north at the start of Robert's rebellion, so he could call the banners after both his father and older brother Brandon were killed in King's Landing. Lastly, there is a theory that Ashara Dane is still alive, and Tyrion meets her in Essos under the name Septon Lemore. In the show, Littlefinger's decision to marry Sansa off to the Boltons in Season 5 made absolutely no sense. First of all, what did the Boltons give Littlefinger? Nothing. What did it cost Littlefinger? His relationship with Sansa. What did it risk? Cersei finding out and stripping him of all his lands, titles, and wealth. However, there is one way the show could have made this work, and that is if Littlefinger married Sansa off to Ramsay in secret, without anyone knowing it was him, and then after the wedding, snuck Sansa out of Winterfell and back to the Vale. Cersei finds out the Boltons try to marry Sansa Stark rather than hand her over, and she turns against them, pitting Sansa's two greatest enemies, House Bolton and Lannister, against each other, just as Stannis is ready to attack and defeat the Boltons. However, what we got instead was brain-numbingly bad. Did you know, in the books, Arya is still a faceless assassin and kills Polliver, the man who did all the torturing at Harrenhal? In the show, they had Arya and the Hound kill Polliver at the Inn of the Crossroads, but in the books, he is alive and well until he is sent to Braavos, which the show had Meryn Trant go in his place. The same thing kind of happened in both instances, but instead of Arya wearing another face like in the show, she seduces Polliver despite being a 13-year-old girl and lures him to her room, where she recreates the way he killed Lomi by cutting open his leg. When he tells her to carry him to the healer, she says, "You think so?" which is what he said to Lomi when he asked to be carried, and Arya gleefully enjoys recreating the kill and only regrets having to drag the body to the canals. In the show, after King Robert made Ned Stark protector of the realm, he is given two offers to join forces with. The first is Renly, who says he can give Ned 100 men and they should strike while the castle is sleeping, separate Joffrey from his mother, and seize Tommen and Marcella just to be safe. After that, they can name Ned as protector and Joffrey as his ward. After that, the Lannisters would not dare strike against him. However, Ned refuses this offer, and Renly subsequently flees King's Landing in the middle of the night with the Tyrells. However, the show had Renly tell Ned he should be king, which is stupid. Ned would never agree to that, so Book Renly is a lot smarter than Show Renly, and Book Ned is a lot dumber for not working with Renly when he knows the children are bastards and have no claim to the Iron Throne. Did you know in the books, Margaery is 16 years old and has thick, curling brown hair and large brown eyes? She is described as common compared to Cersei and Sansa's green and blue eyes, but still has unblemished pale skin and a slender womanly figure. However, politically, Margaery was tutored by her grandmother and uses these skills to her full advantage. First, Renly Baratheon tried to make her queen by wanting to marry her off to King Robert in order to replace Cersei as queen in A Game of Thrones, kind of like Alicent. However, when that failed and the incest became known, Margaery married Renly and tried to get pregnant with his child despite his previous proclivities in A Clash of Kings. After that, she tactfully had Joffrey put Sansa aside for her in her third attempt to become queen in A Storm of Swords, and lastly, has been married off to Tommen despite his young age to finally become Queen of Westeros in A Feast for Crows. Did you know in the books, there is a point of view chapter from Melisandre's perspective where she discloses that much of her actions involve the use of deception and illusions. She admits to employing hidden potions and powders within her sleeves to manipulate the appearance of flames, making them dance and change color. Despite these manipulations, Melisandre genuinely believes in the existence of R'hllor, the Lord of Light, and experiences visions within the flame. Unlike in the show, there is no indication in the books that Melisandre sleeps with Stannis. Their relationship seems to be primarily focused on religious devotion and the fulfillment of prophecies. Furthermore, it is revealed that Melisandre was once a slave girl named Melanie. However, her true age remained ambiguous and unclear within the narrative. If Jon returns from the dead, he might not have any point of view chapters, and instead will follow Melisandre following him. Did you know, in the books, Cersei is 33 and described as a strikingly beautiful woman? She has emerald green eyes, which is why she wears a lot of green, and her hair is a rich curly blonde. When they were children, Cersei and her brother Jaime looked so alike, not even their father, Tywin, could tell them apart. As adults, they still significantly resemble each other. So the idea is that when they share a bed together, they're really sleeping with themselves, and it's all pure narcissism. Cersei thinks of herself as a female version of her father, and feels slighted when people do not obey her commands, as they would have done for Lord Tywin. But Tyrion points out that she is not as smart as she thinks she is, and hilariously describes her as gentle as King Maegor, as selfless as Aegon the Unworthy, and as wise as Mad Aerys. Did you know, in the books, the Eyrie is the smallest of the great castles of Westeros, with 7 slim, white towers that are bunched tightly together and can only hold up to 500 men? The Eyrie lacks stables, smiths, and kennels, but its granary is as large as those in Winterfell. To reach the Eyrie from the west, an invading army would have to first overcome the Bloody Gate guarding the high road. Then there are 3 smaller castles: Stone, Snow, and Sky. However, even reaching these 3 smaller castles requires climbing a gradient too narrow for horses, with steep stone steps carved into the mountainside. Travelers on the staircase are exposed to projectiles from defenders in the 3-way castles, making these 3 almost impregnable before even reaching the Eyrie itself, which is the most heavily fortified with massive provisions, making the Eyrie the smallest but the most unconquerable castle in Westeros. Even though the show had Jaime leave Cersei for Brienne, there's a good chance that Jaime and Brienne might end up together as the Lord and Lady of Castle Rock. This is because, in the books, after Jaime takes Riverrun, he is given a letter from Cersei telling him she has been arrested by the High Sparrow and she needs him now more than she ever has before. However, after reading the letter, Jaime casually burns the letter and makes no effort to go and save Cersei. Meanwhile, Jaime finds an injured Brienne and immediately goes with her to help save Sansa Stark. This is actually a trap set by Lady Stoneheart, but one we think Brienne will save Jaime from. But it goes to show that in the books, Jaime has completely given up on Cersei, but will drop everything, including his army, to help Brienne. Did you know the TV show did everything they could to make the fans hate Jaime Lannister, and it didn't work? For example, in the books, Jaime didn't brutally kill his cousin in a failed escape attempt, or after getting back to King's Landing, Jaime didn't force himself on Cersei next to Joffrey's corpse. He is also one of the greatest swordsmen in the books, and unlike in the show, Brienne is left speechless at just how good he is after their fight. Unlike in the show, where she describes him as being lackluster. He also killed some of Robb's best men in the Battle of the Whispering Woods, and the last way David and Dan tried to sabotage Jaime was having him leave Brienne for Cersei, where a similar scene happens in the book, but instead, Jaime completely ignores Cersei's pleas for help and goes to help Brienne rescue Sansa. Did you know, in the books, Mushroom claims it was Criston Cole who rejected Rhaenyra and not the other way around? This is because after Rhaenyra asked Daemon to help her seduce Sir Criston by sneaking out of the castle to learn how to seduce men and getting caught, Daemon was exiled and Rhaenyra was forced to marry Laenor, unlike in the show where it was her decision. Rhaenyra snuck into White Sword Tower where Criston Cole was alone and disrobed, telling him that her husband will have no use for her maidenhead and to take it as proof of her love for him. However, Criston supposedly rejected her, and this is what caused him to stop being her sworn sword and instead became Alicent Hightowers after killing Joffrey Lonmouth at the tourney for Rhaenyra and Laenor's wedding. However, Mushroom is probably the most unreliable source we have in Fire and Blood. Why didn't Ned accept Littlefinger's offer? Peter Baelish advises Ned that despite their knowledge of Queen Cersei's illegitimate children and that Lord Stannis is the legal heir, the wisest course of action is to ensure Joffrey's succession, a maneuver calculated to avoid all-out war and maximize their own power. Make peace with the Lannisters, release the imp, wed Joffrey to Sansa, wed Arya to Prince Tommen, and your heir to Marcilla. It will be 4 years before Joffrey comes of age. By then, he will look to you as a second father, and if not, well, 4 years is a good long while, my lord. Long enough to dispose of Lord Stannis. Then, should Joffrey prove troublesome, we can reveal his little secret and put Lord Renly on the throne. If Ned had accepted Littlefinger's offer, he could have eventually defeated Lannisters and even Littlefinger and placed whoever, even Gendry or Daenerys, onto the Iron Throne. Did you know, in the books, the Battle of the Blackwater was way more hectic and terrifying? Tyrion orders several of Joffrey's ships to be filled with wildfire, and when Stannis' fleet is lured further into the bay, the ships and river are set ablaze. The flames engulf everything, and the scene looks more like an apocalyptic hellscape. The wildfire destroys nearly every ship in both fleets. To their horror, the men on Stannis' ship discover that the Great Chain has been raised behind them, cutting off their retreat, meaning Tyrion plans for them all to burn. So they use the destroyed ships as a bridge to cross the river and attack the city. Tyrion calls them brave men for practically running through wildfire to meet them in battle. The Hound is broken by the battle, forcing Tyrion to lead the remaining men. In the books, Stannis is on the verge of winning the battle before Tywin and the Tyrell forces arrive. Did you know, in the books, Arya thinks of herself as ugly because her appearance is more stark-looking than Tully, with a long face, grey eyes, and brown hair. She is also very skinny and athletic, and is bullied over her looks by her sister and the other girls at Winterfell, who call her Arya Horseface, in a scene that was cut from the show. She also once confided in Jon that she thinks she is a bastard because she looks nothing like Robb, Sansa, Bran, and Rickon, but instead looks more like him. Jon assures her she is a trueborn, and he was the one she had the closest relationship with. Arya is often described as looking like a boy. However, Eddard also claims Arya takes after her beautiful late aunt, Lyanna Stark, and when Bran Stark sees a version of a girl who could be Lyanna, he describes her as looking like Arya. Did you know, in the books, Dragonstone is a grim and dark place, built using Valyrian sorcery who are capable of liquefying and reshaping stone with dragon flame. The Dragon Lords use their magic to shape Dragonstone to look like multiple dragons. Unlike in the show, where Dragonstone has more of a traditional castle design, with a beachhead and stone pathway that leads to the Dragonhead's gate. It also contains the chamber of the painted table, which is a round room on the top floor of the stone drum. It holds a large table, the painted table, carved and painted in the form of a detailed map of Westeros. This painted table is bigger than what the show presents us with. The great hall where the Prince of Dragonstone greet envoys and guests is carved in the shape of a huge dragon belly with a throne of Valyrian design. As you can tell, Dragonstone's design is much more terrifying in the books.
Did you know, in the books, the Red Wedding was actually so much better because the Northern Lords didn't just roll over and die? Instead, they actually tried to fight back and protect their king. Small John Umber flung over a table and used it to shield Robb Stark from the crossbowmen, and each of Robb's lords gave their lives in the defense of their king. Whereas in the show, they die almost instantly and don't put up any fight. Also, Robb's wife isn't there in the books. She is at Riverrun with the Blackfish. Catelyn also doesn't threaten to kill Walder Frey's wife, but one of his grandsons, Jingle Bell. She tries to exchange a son for a son, but Walder Frey refuses because he already has so many sons. Roose also doesn't say the Lannisters, but instead, Jaime Lannister sends his regards, which is why Lady Stoneheart wants Jaime dead at all cost.
In the books, Rhaenyra was a bright, precocious, and beautiful child. At the age of 14, Rhaenyra was declared by her uncle, Prince Daemon Targaryen, to be the most beautiful maiden in all the Seven Kingdoms. Rhaenyra had a large bosom but never lost the weight she gained from her pregnancies, and she had grown stout and thick of waist at the age of 20 after her third pregnancy. Unlike Alicent, who despite being older, never gained much weight even after her 4 pregnancies. However, Rhaenyra's heavy weight in the books actually makes her more impressive because it means that Rhaenyra didn't rely on her looks to always get what she wanted, and instead had to use her intellect and cunning to get men to do what she wanted. Whereas Alicent does use her looks a lot to get what she wants, making her more like Marjorie and Cersei. Did you know in the books, Robert was huge? Ned estimates his height to be 6.5 feet, whereas Mark Addy was 5'9". Robert has a thick beard and jet black hair with bright blue eyes, which is why it is so easy to see that Gendry is his bastard. As a young adult, Robert was handsome, clean-shaven, with massive muscles and hard hands. In 289 AC, after putting down Greyjoy's rebellion, Robert's appearance began to change. Due to excessive feasting and drinking, Robert gained a significant amount of weight. In the 9 years since, he gained at least 50 kilograms or 110 pounds. The Red Priest, Thoros of Myr, is one of King Robert's only great friends in King's Landing. Well loved by soldiers, Robert is brave, but rash and impatient. Tyrion considers Robert to be a great blustering oaf. Varys describes him as a fool. Did you know in the books, there was a feast that the show cut where Joffrey has Sandor escort Sansa Stark back to the Red Keep. Drunk, despite competing in the Hands tourney the next day, Sandor becomes irritated that Sansa cannot even look him in the eye due to his disfigurement. He mocks her for her polished manners, calling her a little bird who chirps on command. Sandor forces Sansa to look at his face and reveals to her how it was burned by his brother, a supposed great knight, which is why Sandor refuses to let himself be knighted. Sansa feels sorry and tells the Hound that his brother is no true knight, and the two have a really sweet moment together where they walk together quietly. However, after arriving outside her bedchamber, he threatens to kill her if she tells his story to anyone else. The direwolves in the Game of Thrones TV show were captivating creatures that held immense potential. However, despite their initial prominence, the direwolves were underused and treated as a hindrance as the show progressed. Jon Snow's ghost, Robb Stark's Grey Wind, Sansa's Lady, Arya's Nymeria, Bran's Summer, and Rickon's Shaggy Dog were sadly shoved out of the Game of Thrones show as quickly as possible by lazy writing. The most prominent example being Ghost, who had such a close connection and plot importance to Jon Snow, was eventually regulated to a background character in season 6 and 7 in favor of showing off Daenerys' dragons before being given a pitiful return in season 8 when he should have been front and center when Jon met Daenerys at Dragonstone. Even Arya's reunion with Nymeria was extremely underwhelming, and Summer's ultimate demise and lack of screen time was very disappointing. The Dawn plotline in the Game of Thrones TV show stands as a glaring example of how a promising storyline can be mishandled and ultimately ruined. In the books, Dawn is a rich and intricate region as seen by Oberyn's great introduction in Season 4, and hosts a plethora of compelling characters. However, the TV adaptation reduced Doran Martell, one of the realm's most powerful and cunning characters, to a passive and indecisive figure who accomplished nothing. Equally disappointing was the portrayal of the Sand Snakes, who were presented as one-dimensional caricatures, their actions lacking nuance and sophisticated motivation. The assassination of Doran Martell and the Sand Snakes seizing control lacked any careful build-up. Areo Hotah, one of the deadliest fighters in Westeros, dies almost instantly, and even the Sand Snakes and Elia get a worthless conclusion to their stories, making Dawn the worst plotline in the show. Did you know, in the books, despite all the Green's effort to bribe and control the Gold Cloaks of King's Landing, they will always be loyal to Daemon Targaryen. Despite higher pay and promises, the Gold Cloaks immediately betray the Greens once they see Daemon Targaryen flying above the walls of King's Landing, when Hightower denounces them as traitors. So Luthor laughs at him, saying that Daemon gave them these cloaks, and they have not forgotten. Because before Daemon, the City Watch were looked down upon by the High Lords such as Otto Hightower and treated like dirt. But as Lord Commander of the City Watch, Daemon raised them up, gave them gold cloaks, and turned them into a respectable private army. He would also send them money from time to time, even from Pentos, so they would always remain a powerful military, and this loyalty will be repaid in time. Did you know, in the books, there was a really important character that the show cut entirely, and that was Arianna Martell. She was the daughter of Doran Martell and heir to Dawn. There was actually a plot in the book where she was supposed to marry Viserys, and Dawn would rise up for him as king, but it never materialized. In the upcoming Winds of Winter, she will decide who Dawn allies with in the war for the Iron Throne. She might also marry her cousin, Aegon Targaryen, the son of Elia and Rhaegar Targaryen, to become Queen of Westeros. However, George has said Aegon and Daenerys will have a second Dance of the Dragons, like Rhaenyra and Aegon.
Did you know, in the books, Robb was considered the good-looking brother with red-hair Tully features, while Jon was the more stark-looking son. Robb's appearance favors his mother with a muscular build, piercing blue eyes, and thick red-brown hair on his head and beard. He is strong and a better rider, while Jon is quick and a better swordsman. Robb starts the book series as a boy of 14 years, while in the show he is much older and already a brooding young man. However, Robb is a lot like Ned, and this can be seen when, in the books, he sleeps with Jean Westerling, or Talisa as she goes by in the show, and decides to marry her to protect her honor over his own. However, this destroys his marriage pact to Walder Frey, and like Ned, Robb Stark's honor also leads to his death.
In the Battle of Winterfell and the journey north of the Wall, so many fan-favorite characters were able to survive seemingly impossible situations that broke any semblance of realism. After Season 6, there were no more books to adapt, and it shows, with characters like Jon Snow, Arya Stark, and others, appearing to possess impenetrable plot armor, enabling them to survive against insurmountable odds. Despite being vastly outnumbered and surrounded by swarms of whites on both occasions, we lose only Theon Greyjoy, Thoros of Myr, and Jorah Mormont by the end of it. And Jon survives being dragged underwater and coming face to face with the Night King and his dragon. which is eerily similar to Jaime also being dragged underwater and coming face to face with the dragon, and surviving both times as well. Meanwhile, Sam survives being left for dead, and Arya's plot armor doesn't need mentioning. Did you know, in the books, Doria and Jorah might have been antagonizing Viserys on purpose to get him killed? Here is the evidence. Daenerys told Doria to invite Viserys for dinner. However, Doria should know better than to tell Viserys that his sister had commanded him to eat with her when she knows full well what happened the last time Viserys thought Dany had ordered him to do something when the Khalasar stopped in the Dothraki Sea. Lastly, when Viserys stumbles into the tent demanding dragon eggs, he seems to be under the impression that he can't be killed in Vaes Dothrak because it is forbidden to shed blood. However, this is simply not true, and the only two people who have communicated this wrong information is Jorah and Doria. So why would these two shepherd Viserys to his death? Maybe it had to do with hatching dragon eggs, or that Viserys had become an inconvenience. Did you notice in the show that nearly every one of Jon Snow's plans did not succeed? Starting with Season 5, Jon got himself completely blindsided by the Night's Watch and was killed, only to be saved by Melisandre. Then, in Season 6, he completely fell for Ramsay Bolton's trap and nearly got his army of Northmen and wildlings slaughtered, only to be saved by Sansa's reinforcements. His Season 7 plan to capture a White nearly failed, only to be rescued by Daenerys at the last second, which cost her one of her dragons that would be used to bring down the wall. Then, his next plan to convince Cersei also fails. His plan to defeat the Night's King also fails, only to be salvaged by Arya, killing the Night's King out of nowhere. And lastly, his plan to put Daenerys on the Iron Throne also fails, and gets everyone in the city killed. Did you know George initially planned to have a 5-year time skip after the War of the Five Kings ended, which the show should have done by taking a year off after Season 4. We could have had Arya spend 5 years training with the Faithless Assassins, and we could skip all the sweeping flaws. Daenerys could have spent that 5 years ruling Meereen and allowing her dragons to grow. Jon could have spent that time as Lord Commander, with Stannis manning all the castles on the wall. Sansa and Littlefinger could have spent that time making the Vale completely theirs. Cersei could have spent that time misruling the Seven Kingdoms so that Myrcella could declare herself queen with the support of Dorne. Bran could have spent that time becoming a powerful Greenseer. Tyrion could have made it to Meereen, and Episode 1 could have been Tyrion finally getting an audience with Daenerys. Did you know, in George's original outline, both the Starks and Lannisters were going to have one member that betrayed the rest of the family? For House Stark, this was Sansa, who would choose Joffrey over her father and give birth to Joffrey's children, only to later rue the decision when Joffrey is killed in battle against Robb, only for Jaime to then kill Robb and claim the Iron Throne for himself, by having both Tommen and Myrcella killed and blaming the murders on Tyrion. Meanwhile, Tyrion was the one who would betray his family after taking Winterfell, similar to what Theon did, and sacking it, only to be put on trial and betrayed by his brother, Jaime, before joining the Starks and getting into a love triangle between himself, Arya, and Jon Snow. However, this version was scrapped, and Tyrion was made older, while Arya was made younger. What if, in the show, Myrcella was actually given a really good plotline? For example, in the books, under Dornish law, the elder sibling is heir, meaning Myrcella, who is older than Tommen, would be the rightful queen of Westeros, while she presides in Dorne. We could have had a really interesting plotline where Myrcella declares herself queen and Dorne rises up for her. She and Tommen meet, and the two of them are still close. But Myrcella makes the case that she and Trystane would make better rulers than him, with Margaery and Cersei squabbling over him while the High Sparrow has seized King's Landing. Tommen might even be weak-willed enough to agree with her, but knows their mother and Margaery would never allow it. There would be so much tension with Jaime that he might be unsure of who to support and what to do when Daenerys invades, etc. Did you know, in the books, the Riverlands were under the control of the Ironborn and were ruled by Harren the Black? Aegon gave Harren the opportunity to surrender to him, but Harren believed the massive walls of Harrenhal would protect him. However, when the time came, Aegon flew his dragon down from the sky and roasted everyone inside, including Harren's entire family, which would lead to Aegon the Conqueror naming the Greyjoys as the new lords of the Iron Islands. In both book and show, Harrenhal is a ruined castle because of what Aegon did to it, and defeating the Ironborn was the first stop in his conquest of Westeros. He would next face off against the Stormlands in his pursuit to unite the Seven Kingdoms. Did you know, in the books, Arya becoming a faceless assassin is a really interesting plotline, but unfortunately, there are only 5 chapters so far, which is why in the show, Arya's training to become a ruthless assassin was so slow, because the showrunners tried to drag out those 5 chapters as much as possible with sweeping, cleaning bodies, and pointless tension between Arya and the waif, which doesn't exist in the books. Also, unlike in the book, Arya didn't seem happy to be at the House of the Black and White, while in the book, Arya is desperate for them to keep her so she can learn their secrets to kill all those on her list in Westeros. Instead, the show should have had a time jump similar to what Bran was given in Season 5, and that way, at the end of it, Arya's transformation into an unstoppable assassin would have made more sense. What if Sansa had chosen to run away with the Hound at the end of Season 2, when he offered to take her away from King's Landing? Well, their plan probably would have been the same as his plan with Arya, and that is to get her to her family as quickly as possible where they will be safe. Like Arya, we could have seen them build a close bond and be in a situation kind of similar to Beauty and the Beast. Except they don't end up together at the end of it. They could have still been caught by the Brotherhood without banners, which means Arya and Sansa would have met up earlier in the show and maybe traveled together to Riverrun or the Vale. After that, Littlefinger would have been waiting for them with Lysa, who would still be alive since Peter wouldn't have thrown her through the moon door. Did you know, in the books, Daemon Targaryen is 24 at the start of House of the Dragon Episode 1, and often wears a gold cloak wherever he goes, since he is commander of the City Watch of King's Landing and wielded the second most famous Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister. Daemon Targaryen is described as dashing and dangerous. Archmaester Gildain wrote that Daemon was ambitious, moody, and as charming as he was hot-tempered. Daemon was a renowned warrior, skilled in the joust, hunting, and swordplay. He was unfaithful to his first wife, Rhae Royce, by taking Mysaria as his paramour, and suspected of being unfaithful to Rhaenyra Targaryen by taking Nettles as his lover. However, he was always fiercely loyal to his brother, Viserys. His dragon Caraxes is called the Bloodworm because it is a stunted dragon with a long neck and wings on his hind legs to help it fly. Another reason why the Game of Thrones later seasons fell flat was because Jon Snow and Daenerys did not have good chemistry. For example, Ygritte and Jon worked so well because Rosie Leslie is an amazing actress, and she was so good at flirting with stiff and awkward Jon that it was fun to watch Ygritte make Jon hers. The same with Khal Drogo and Daenerys, where it was Jason Momoa seducing Daenerys with his eyes without even being able to speak the same language. But he communicated his desire and intensity, and that alone was enough to buy into their love story. Whereas Jon and Dany don't know how to be the dominant partner, both of them looking at the other, waiting for them to make the first move. Did you know, in the books, the Iron Throne is described as a colossal, imposing structure, unlike the elegant, single-tiered throne seen in the HBO TV adaptation? The book version is much more intimidating and scary. Forged from the 1,000 swords of Aegon's conquest, it's not just a chair, but a large, asymmetrical structure of grotesque beauty. The swords were melted together by dragon breath and bent into a throne, described as being uncomfortable and dangerous to sit upon. The blades are not fully blunted, so the king can cut himself on the throne, a reminder that a king should never sit easy. It serves as a metaphor of the inherent risks and responsibilities of wielding absolute power. In fact, Maegor the Cruel died upon the throne, while Viserys, Rhaenyra, and Aerys cut themselves on its sharp blades. As a metaphor, they would not sit on it long. Did Jorah help Viserys get himself killed? Before his death, Jorah prevented Viserys from taking the dragon eggs, even though Daenerys was okay with him having them. When Viserys stumbles in drunk, Jorah, for some reason, translates the insult being thrown at Viserys. Daenerys even notes to herself she can't hear what Jorah is saying to Viserys when he should be trying to placate him. Viserys shouts back at Jorah, the two grapple, and Viserys then draws his sword, which escalates the entire situation. Lastly, Viserys has been given some very poor information about Dothraki culture. Viserys laughed. "They can't kill us. They can't shed blood here in this sacred city, but I can." However, it is commonly known that people die all the time in vast Dothrak, and Viserys seems to have been given wrong information, which could only have come from Doria or Jorah. Did you know in the books, Arya was not Tywin Lannister's cupbearer, but Roose Bolton's? She would actually help bring him leeches that he would bathe in naked in front of Freys, while the seeds of the Red Wedding were being planted. Sadly, Arya was unaware of what Roose was planning and oblivious to the treachery brewing right under her nose. It is also in Roose Bolton's presence that she hears Winterfell has been sacked, and her brothers have been killed. After Roose leaves to eventually attend Robb Stark's wedding at the Twins, Arya asks to accompany Roose, but Lord Bolton is shocked by his servant's insolence and threatens to cut out her tongue, and Arya knows he would do it. Arya escapes with Gendry and Hot Pie, killing a Bolton guard at the gate, whereas in the show, they had Jaqen help them escape after Tywin left. Did you know Jaime Lannister's life story is full of sorrow and super depressing? He was born a Lannister, yet he endured the early loss of his mother during Tyrion's birth. His father consistently overlooked his desires, and his sister Cersei, who vowed eternal love and then planned to abandon him for Prince Rhaegar. Jaime even joined the King's Guard with the sole intention of being close to Cersei, only to witness Rhaegar marry Elia instead, and being a bystander to the Mad King's horrendous deeds. Despite doing what was necessary, he faced ridicule and insult from honorable men like Ned Stark. He then served another undeserving king under Robert, was victim to Cersei's manipulations, and found out she was cheating on him. The loss of his hand represented the loss of his own identity, and in the TV show, he was given probably one of the worst and most disappointing ends to a fan-favorite character. Did you know in the books, Robb could have potentially won Northern independence after defeating Jaime at Riverrun with Theon, and offered a marriage alliance where Theon would marry Sansa and Catelyn would also marry Victarion, which would have been hilarious, and in return, they would defend each other's kingdoms from the Iron Throne and work together to sack Lannisport and Castle Rock, while Tywin was stuck in Harrenhal waiting for Renly or Stannis to march on King's Landing. In the books, Theon dreams of marrying Sansa and would have definitely agreed. Sadly, Baelon probably wouldn't have. However, a Stark Greyjoy alliance would have been so cool to see, and maybe Robb would have ended up breaking his Frey betrothal for Book Asha, and they would each rule their respective kingdoms. However, this is even less likely than Baelon agreeing to an alliance in the first place. Did you know in the books, Stannis is a large man? Jon Snow notes that Stannis towers over him. He has dark blue eyes like Robert, and only a fringe of black hair, like the shadow of a crown. He grinds his teeth regularly, which Cersei finds infuriating to listen to. Stannis is more loyal to his wife in the books than he is in the show, where they kind of forgot about his strong sense of duty and justice. However, nobody likes him, and even Cersei tells Tyrion Robert gave Stannis Dragonstone, not Storm's End, out of spite. So, instead of having 40,000 Stormlanders at his command, Stannis had less than 10,000 men across the islands of Dragonstone. However, there was an argument for placing someone strong, capable, and loyal on the ancestral Targaryen seat, and Renly was only a boy and too weak to give Dragonstone to. Did you know in the books, Gilly is 15 years old and has a pale, gaunt face, dark hair, and big brown doe eyes. Even after giving birth, Gilly retains a slim figure and is regarded as quite pretty. According to Jon Snow, Gilly is somewhat childlike in appearance and has a soft, shy voice. In the books, Jon forces Gilly to leave Castle Black, not with her own baby, but Mance Raydar's, since Melisandre might burn Mance's baby for its king's blood. Gilly refuses at first, but Jon promises that on the day Mance's baby burns, her baby will burn also at his command. This forces Gilly to be separated from her own child, and eventually Maester Aemon figures out what Jon has done and tells Sam. Sam is horrified at what Jon has done. And lastly, after leaving Craster's Keep, Gilly frequently dresses in Samwell's old black cloak.
Did you know in the books, Jorah Mormont is a creep? Not only is he eyeing up a 13-year-old girl, but he hates Ned Stark and thinks slavery should be his right as Lord of Bear Island. He also makes an advance on Daenerys in the books and kisses her intently against her will. In reality, Show Jorah is far too good-looking and charming to be playing this character. He even says this in the books: "They'll pay a better price than he'd get from a slaving caravan." Ilroy writes that they had a plague last year, so the slavers are paying double for healthy young girls and triple for boys under 10. If enough children survive the journey, the gold will buy us all the ships we need. In the books, he is the classic, thinks he is a nice guy when he is actually super manipulative.
Did you know in the books, after Jaime lost the Battle of Riverrun, Tywin seems to give up on Jaime after Ned Stark has been executed and making Tyrion his future heir by giving him the position of Hand of the King. Tyrion asks him why not Kevan or someone bigger, and Tywin replies, "Because you are my son." That was when he knew, you have given him up for lost, he thought. You think Jaime's good as dead, so I'm all you have left. Tyrion wanted to slap him, to spit in his face, to draw his dagger and cut the heart out of him. Yet he sat there, silent and still. If Jaime had been executed, Tywin might have positioned Tyrion to be his heir, since he has no other sons by Joanna to inherit Casterly Rock, or given the rock to Kevan for his outstanding loyalty, making Lancel heir.
Did you know in the books, it wasn't Joffrey who ordered the death of all King Robert's illegitimate children, but most likely Cersei? This is an important change from the books, since in the TV show, Cersei doesn't have it in her to slaughter innocent babies and knows the consequences of such an act. With Joffrey, it shows he has doubts about himself and kills innocent children to silence any claim to his legitimacy. So Joffrey clings to the claim rather than believing it to be absolute truth. Meanwhile, in the books, it's the other way around. Cersei kills the babies for she wants no possible contenders to her son's throne. But by doing so, she proves she has something to hide and sows hatred in the populace. Whereas Joffrey had nothing to do with it because he never once doubted he was Robert's son, and never paid any heed to the rumors.
Did you know in the books, Littlefinger wasn't planning to betray Ned, but actually wanted to work with him to rule the Seven Kingdoms? The only problem is that Ned wanted to put Stannis on the Iron Throne, and Littlefinger knew that even if they succeeded, Stannis would show them no gratitude and not reward either of them. Littlefinger stirred the Lannister-Stark rivalry because he knew he had the gold cloaks and could tell them who to support, depending on who offered the most. Since the Lannisters were offering Harrenhal and Ned Stark offered Littlefinger nothing for his support, Littlefinger begrudgingly helped the Lannisters defeat Ned in the throne room. If Ned had just played the Game of Thrones and asked Littlefinger what his price was and given him Harrenhal, he could have taken Cersei, Joffrey, Tommen, and Marcella prisoner and won the war in a single stroke with himself as regent. Did you know in the books, Stannis has this really touching scene that shows he truly regrets killing his brother without ever saying it. He tells Davos, "Renly offered me a peach at our parley, mocked me, defied me, threatened me, and offered me a peach. I thought he was drawing a blade and went for mine own. Was that his purpose, to make me show fear? Or was it one of his pointless jests? When he spoke of how sweet the peach was, did his words have some hidden meaning?" The king gave a shake of his head. "Only Renly could vex me so with a piece of fruit. He brought doom on himself with his treason. But I did love him, Davos. I know that now, I swear. I will go to my grave thinking of my brother's peach." Fans still debate on the meaning of the peach to this day. Did you know in the books, Euron Greyjoy is genuinely terrifying, unlike his show counterpart? The only scene that hinted at his potential was when he spoke to his brother Balon on the bridge in his first introduction. In the books, everyone is terrified of Euron. Asha, Theon, and all other Iron Men truly fear his black reputation. His ship, the Silence, is manned by mutes because Euron cannot stand the noise of people talking. Euron also has a deep fascination with Lovecraftian horror and plans to bring apocalypse to Westeros. He traveled to Old Valyria and found a magic horn that can supposedly bind dragons to his will, and he plans to marry Daenerys and help bring about the Long Night, since, as the Ironborn like to say, what is dead may never die, but rises again, stronger and harder, similar to the White Walkers and their throngs of undead. Did you know in the books, it is heavily implied that the Shadow Baby that killed Renly was in fact being controlled by Stannis? Here is the evidence. During the time of Renly's death, Stannis could not be woken by his squire Devon Seaworth. Next, Caitlin describes the Shadow Assassin as looking like Stannis Baratheon, and so does Brienne of Tarth. Thirdly, Stannis begins to age, and it looks like his life force has been drained, which is why he is unable to make more shadow babies with Melisandre, since it might kill him. Lastly, Stannis seems to have a dream of the event, but tries to dismiss it, maybe out of regret and shame for killing his own younger brother. This is why he obsesses over the peach that Renly offered him during their parley, since he knows deep down it was him who thrust the blade into Renly's chest. Did you know that in the books, Cersei briefly explores a romantic relationship with Taena Merryweather, an attractive woman from Mia? Following Tywin's death, Cersei, now serving as Queen Regent, spends a significant amount of time with Taena. During this period, Cersei's misrule of the Seven Kingdoms involves allowing the Faith to rearm despite their brutal suppression by Maegor more than 2 centuries ago, and failing to make payments to the Iron Bank of Braavos. Although Taena is not interested in being intimate with Cersei, she engages in romantic activities to gain favor for her son and husband. In a bold move, Cersei appoints Taena's husband as the Hand of the King instead of Kevin, after he confronts her and questions her abilities as both a ruler and a mother, remarking, "And from what I saw of Joffrey, you are as unfit a mother as you are a ruler." Did you know in the books, it might not have been Daenerys who birthed her dragons, but the red comet scene at the very beginning of A Clash of Kings, or Season 2 of the show? This is because previous Targaryens have done what Daenerys did, and tried to hatch dragons, only to fail and get themselves killed, like Aerion Brightflame, or the tragedy at Summerhall. The red comet is believed to be a Volcran, a giant spacefaring creature that lives in space from George R.R. Martin's Night Flyers series. This creature enhances human telekinetic powers and wakes dormant energy similar to turning stone dragon eggs into fire-made flesh. This is why, after the red comet, Melisandre is able to birth shadow babies, and magic seems to be more apparent in the Game of Thrones universe. Meaning, had the Volcarin not arrived, Daenerys would have just burnt up with Khal Drogo in the funeral pyre. Did you know in the books, there are 3 rules that a warg like Bran cannot commit? The first is to eat the flesh of man. Bran has done this when he ate the Night's Watch mutineers as Summer in A Dance with Dragons. The second rule is not to mate while warging into another animal. Bran has not done this. And lastly, to seize the body of another man. This is the worst abomination and the one that Bran has committed the most times through Hodor. However, there is a terrifying theory that because of Bran's affection for Mira and the ease at which he can slip into Hodor's skin, Bran might try and mate with Mira through Hodor and break the last of the 3 rules which he hasn't broken. Since Bran's last interaction with Mira is him in Hodor's skin comforting her, and she runs out of the room afraid of him.
In Season 2, Episode 1,
the episode opens with King Joffrey Baratheon celebrating his name day by hosting a brutal tourney. Sansa Stark, his betrothed, skillfully manages to save Sir Dontos Hollard from being executed for drunkenness by suggesting that he'd be made the court fool instead. Tyrion Lannister enters the city as the new Hand of the King. He is there to keep Joffrey in check and prepare the city's defenses. Cersei Lannister, Joffrey's mother and the Queen Regent, comes to an understanding with Tyrion about their respective roles in the capital. However, she begins to feel her authority waning, especially when she confronts Littlefinger, warning him not to cross her, highlighting the fragile alliances and silent conflicts simmering beneath the surface. A significant and horrifying event occurs when Joffrey, having heard about the truth of his parentage, orders the massacre of all of King Robert's illegitimate children in King's Landing, leading to a gruesome bloodbath.
In the book, Crescent tries to persuade Stannis to forge an alliance with Robb Stark, even if that means giving up the North and Riverlands. Citing half a kingdom is better than none. He also tries to persuade him to help Robb avenge his father, but Stannis reveals his bitterness at how Eddard Stark was closer to his brother Robert than he was. In the books, Stannis doesn't receive the letter from Eddard saying that he is heir, because Tomard was killed before he could deliver it. Stannis had already discovered the true parentage of Robert and Cersei's children long before Eddard, as he had first taken these suspicions to Jon Arryn, and they had been investigating it together. Melisandre is not cruel to Crescent. It is Stannis' wife, Selyse, doing the mocking. She also realizes Crescent's plan and tells him he doesn't have to do it, trying to save him because she never bore him any ill will. In Season 2, Episode 1, Jon Snow, accompanied by Lord Commander Jorah Mormont and fellow brothers of the Night's Watch, venture beyond the Wall on a mission to investigate the strange occurrences in the north and to search for Benjen Stark. They hope to discover more about the growing threat of the White Walkers. Upon reaching the outpost known as Craster's Keep, the group encounters Craster, an unsavory wildling who takes multiple wives, many of whom are his own daughters. The Night's Watch seeks shelter and information from him. Craster informs them that Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, is uniting the wildlings. While the information is valuable, Jon and his comrades are deeply disturbed by Craster's ways. Gilly tells the Night's Watch how grateful she is for Craster's protection, but Jon Snow is only angered by this, and Jorah has to lecture him outside about learning how to lead.
Did you know, in the books, Euron claims to have sailed to the ruins of Valyria and survived, returning with a horn capable of controlling dragons, as well as a Valyrian suit of armor. However, what is most terrifying is the idea that he might actually be Daario, and in the books, Daenerys wants to marry Daario but can't because he is too lowborn. However, if he was really the king of the Iron Islands, then he would make a suitable match for a conquering queen. Unfortunately, Euron plans to bring apocalypse to Westeros and claims that when the Kraken weds the dragon, let all the world be aware. His boast sounds crazy, but not if he is Daario and knows Dany wants to marry him. This might also be why Daario has such an outlandish appearance in the books, with dyed blue hair and a beard with a golden tooth and yellow clothes, to hide his true identity.
Did you know, in the books, Tommen begs to be allowed to ride in Joffrey's name day tourney? Joffrey berates him, but Marcella points out that Mother said he could, and Joffrey relents to his two siblings. Tommen is ecstatic. Being only 6, he has to ride a pony and falls off it during his joust. Despite making a fool of himself, the Hound points out, "Look," the Hound interrupted, "the boy has courage. He's going to try again." They were helping Prince Tommen mount his pony. If only Tommen were the elder instead of Joffrey, Sansa thought. I wouldn't mind marrying Tommen. Maybe instead of Tyrion, Sansa should have been married to Tommen, since the two of them probably would have made each other very happy, and after the war, Tommen would most likely be given Storm's End or Castle Rock to rule from, or even Winterfell with Sansa.
Did you know, in the books, the Boltons are portrayed very similar to werewolf hunters as well as vampires, and this might be the reason for their ancient practice of skinning alive their enemies, who traditionally were the Starks. Roose tells Arya, "It is the wolves I mean to hurt. I can scarcely sleep at night for the howling," and then says, "It is said that direwolves once roamed the north in great packs of 100 or more, but that was long ago, and in another land." It is believed the Boltons hunted them down and skinned them alive to torture the Starks trapped inside of them. Meanwhile, Roose is believed to be an unaging vampire and is only keeping Ramsay around so he can take his identity or skin once he has grown too old and requires a new identity. However, this is a book-only theory. Having emerged from the funeral pyre with 3 hatched dragons at the end of the previous season, Daenerys Targaryen finds herself and her diminished Khalasar stranded in the Red Waste, a vast, barren desert. Their situation is perilous. They are without sufficient water or food, and Daenerys' horse, Silver, given to her by Khal Drogo, succumbs and dies. However, in the books, Daenerys' horse is still alive and well, and instead it was Dora who died here, whereas in the show they had her betray Daenerys and be left to die in Xaro's vault at the end of season 2. Daenerys is determined to find a safe refuge for her people and sends 3 of her blood riders in different directions to scout for any signs of civilization or sanctuary. However, what's interesting is that in the books, they find a mysterious abandoned city called Vaes Tolero that the show cut out, unfortunately, but holds some scary mysteries. Did you know in the books, King Robert's small council before the arrival of Ned Stark was super funny? For example, Stannis proposed outlawing coin for sex, and Robert was so aghast that he asked if Stannis meant to outlaw breathing while he was at it. It was also joked that since Stannis only shares his marriage bed once or twice a year with Selyse and took no joy in it, Renly and Littlefinger commented that Stannis goes into bed with his wife like a man marching into battle, which is ironic coming from Renly and what happens to him later with Marjorie. Lastly, during Stannis' wedding to Lady Selyse of House Florent, Robert deflowered Delena, a cousin of Selyse, on Stannis' very own wedding bed. According to Robert, he was too drunk to know which bed it was. This coupling led to the birth of Edric Storm, who Stannis meant to burn for his king's blood in the books, not Gendry.
In Season 2, Episode 1, Robb informs the captive Jaime of Stannis' letter, surmising that his brother Bran was crippled by Jaime. However, this revelation comes at the end of Book 2, not at the beginning. Robb sends Jaime's cousin, Oberyn Lannister, to King's Landing with terms for peace, including the return of Robb's sisters, Ned's remains, and Northern independence. Theon Greyjoy, once a ward and now Robb's ally, suggests an alliance with his father, Balon Greyjoy, to gain naval advantage. Theon believes he can persuade his father to join Robb's cause, despite their strained past. Catelyn Stark is concerned about Sansa and Arya, and wishes to return home. Robb, understanding the bigger picture, sends her to the Stormlands. He wants her to negotiate with the Baratheon brothers, Stannis and Renly, in hopes of forging another alliance. She agrees, but tells him not to trust Balon Greyjoy.
Did you know in the books, Cersei tried to sleep with Ned to ensure he would support her son as king after Robert died, but Ned refused her, meaning Cersei found Ned not impossible to sleep with. So what if Robert Baratheon had chosen not to become king after Lyanna died and instead, with the support of Jon Arryn, argued that Ned Stark should be the king of Westeros? Not because of blood, but through alliance. Obviously, this would never have happened since Ned married Catelyn before going off to war, and whoever would sit the Iron Throne would need to be married to Cersei Lannister to ensure Tywin's support. But it would have been crazy to see what Ned Stark and Cersei Lannister would have accomplished as king and queen of Westeros. And Cersei probably would have had Ned Stark's children, since he would have been faithful, unlike Robert, and there might have been no war of the Five Kings. Did you know in the books, Stannis sends out hundreds of letters declaring Cersei's children to be born of incest? Cersei is enraged and orders all copies of the proclamation burnt, and decrees that anyone who repeats the allegations should have their tongue cut out. Tyrion points out that it is folly to try and suppress a rumor, and trying to do so would be counterproductive. At Littlefinger's suggestion, they retaliate by questioning the parentage of Shireen Baratheon, with her actual father being Stannis' fool, Patchface. Patchface is a book-only character who was considered to have lost all his mental faculties after a shipwreck that left Stannis' mother and father both dead. But Patchface seems to be able to see the future and can predict events like the Red Wedding before they happen through his rhymes. Melisandre is also afraid of him, which might suggest he is a servant of the Great Other. Did you know Sansa's Book 1 or Season 1 arc is actually really good? She starts with a pretty empty-headed heroine with no concern for the flights of others like Jon Snow or the Hound. However, after choosing love over her family when she sided with Joffrey at Castle Darry, her pet direwolf Lady was killed. Then again, the Hand's Tawny opens her eyes to the brutality of supposedly chivalrous knights. Lastly, Sansa fails to learn from the incident at Darry, and when the moment comes to choose between her family and her fantasy, she chooses wrong. And this helps get her father killed in his failed coup, and the man she thought she loved turns out to be a monster. The book, or season, ends with her learning to survive and becoming a more adept and intelligent player in the Game of Thrones. In Season 2, Episode 2, the Small Council ignores Robb Stark's peace terms, as well as the request by the Night's Watch for more men and their report of encounters with the undead. Tyrion Lannister quickly begins to assert his new political influence by having Janos Slynt removed as the City Watch commander when he refuses to reveal who ordered the purge of King Robert Baratheon's illegitimate children. Tyrion exiles him to the Night's Watch, replacing him with Bronn. Cersei confronts Tyrion about exiling Slynt, causing Tyrion to realize that King Joffrey Baratheon ordered the purge without telling Cersei, and we actually get a really vulnerable Cersei seeing her power diminish right in front of her eyes. Tyrion cracks a joke, and Cersei responds by saying Tyrion has always been funny, but nothing will ever top his first joke. Their brilliant and beautiful mother dead, and in her place, they got stuck with Tyrion. In Season 2, Episode 2, Rikaro's horse returns to Daenerys Targaryen's camp carrying his severed head, leaving Irri devastated and explaining that his soul will never rest with the ancestors since they did not burn his body. Ser Jorah Mormont explains it is a message from another Khal refusing to accept a woman's rule over a Khalasar, and Daenerys vows revenge. Whereas in the books, Rikaro returns first, only finding ocean. Aggo returns next, having found 2 deserted cities smaller than Vay's Row. Jogo is the last to return, much later, bringing 3 queerly garbed strangers from the Green City of Karth: the Great Warlock, Pyat Pri, the Merchant Prince, Xaro Shan Daxos of the 13, and Quaithe of the Shadow. They come seeking dragons, and so in the books, Daenerys was actually invited to Karth by 3 people who each want to use her dragons for different nefarious reasons.
In Season 2, Episode 1,
Stannis Baratheon is introduced in a public ceremony where Melisandre burns effigies of the Seven, the main deities of Westeros, signaling the rejection of the old gods in favor of her Lord of Light. Stannis is a stern and unyielding man, and he has embraced the foreign faith of R'hllor, led by the Red Priestess, Melisandre. Maester Cressen, a loyal advisor, attempts to poison Melisandre to save him from her influence. However, her powers seemingly protect her, and Cressen dies instead. Determined to claim the Iron Throne, Stannis has a letter drafted declaring to the 7 kingdoms that Joffrey Baratheon, the current king, is not Robert's legitimate heir, but the product of incest between Queen Cersei and her twin, Jaime Lannister. The letter is to be sent to all corners of Westeros. Storm's End is the seat of House Baratheon. The castle is located at the northern coast of Shipbreaker Bay. It is surrounded by a massive outer curtain wall 100 feet high and 40 feet thick. It is considered impregnable by siege, which is why Mace Tyrell was unable to take it from Stannis during Robert's rebellion, despite overwhelming forces. Storm's End has only 1 tower, a colossal drum tower crowned with formidable battlements, making it look like a huge, spiked fist thrusting towards the sky from afar. The King's Road runs north from Storm's End through the Stormlands and the Kingswood to King's Landing. In the books, Stannis still holds the fortress despite leaving for the north in a storm of swords, and leaving behind a token force of 200 men. However, the castle is so strong, the Lannisters and Tyrells have still been unable to take it. Did you know in the books, Xaro was not black, and he is still alive in the books? Him not being black is actually an important plot detail in the book, because despite being surrounded by a desert, the Qartheen are super pale, and the 3 walls surrounding Qarth suggest it used to be surrounded by lush greenery before something happened to turn the land into a red waste. Xaro is also still alive because in the books, Daenerys' dragons aren't taken from her, and she willingly goes to visit Pyat Pri in the House of the Undying, where they try to absorb her into them. Also, Zara comes back in a Dance with Dragons and is very important because he convinced Karth to side with the slavers in Daenerys' war in Meereen. It also looks like Daenerys will return to Karth to uncover the mysteries of the Red Waste and its people. Did you know in the books, Sir Arthur Dayne, the legendary sword fighter who served King Aerys, might still be alive as Mance Rayder? The evidence for this comes from the fact that Mance Rayder was able to humiliate Jon in the books when wielding a greatsword, which, firstly, a wildling like Mance should have no experience with, and second, he acts as though it has been a long time since he wielded one, indicating he hasn't practiced in more than a decade but was still able to overwhelm Jon with minimal ease. And House Dayne named their heir Ned Dayne in honor of Ned Stark for bringing the Valyrian steel blade, Dawn, back to Starfall. But why would they honor the man who killed Sir Arthur Dayne unless he didn't? This theory also suggests Tormund is Gerald Hightower and Qhorin Halfhand is Oswell Went. Did you know in the books, Yara Greyjoy is named Asha? Her name was changed to avoid being confused with the wildling Osha. Arya does not reveal her identity to Gendry until much later in the books, and considers killing him, but decides not to simply because he is stronger than her, not due to any romantic feelings, which she does not have in the books because she is 8. Davos has 7 sons in the books, while in the TV show he only has 1, Mathos. Stannis doesn't sleep with Melisandre. It is only hinted at in the 3rd book. It is Doria, not Ricardo, who dies in the Red Waste in the novels. The scene where Craster sacrifices his son to the White Walkers is never shown in the books, but instead explained to Jon by Gilly. Did you notice that in the latest seasons, Arya Stark kind of became a villain? For instance, she literally took the face of one of Walder Frey's young female servants, since she didn't leave the house of Black and White with any. Additionally, her massacre of the Frey men seems excessive as not all of them were guilty, drawing parallels to the near annihilation of the Starks. Her reunion with Sansa becomes tense for no reason, and she contemplates killing her only sister and taking her face over a letter she wrote while under duress, and only didn't thanks to the late intervention of Bran, who prevented such a pointless misunderstanding from taking place. Lastly, Arya's immediate distrust of Daenerys by calling her not one of us sounds like something the Lannisters would say and not a daughter of Ned Stark. Did you know in the books, Catelyn does not travel to Renly's camp alone. Robb assigns 20 of his best Winterfell men and 5 lordlings, Wendell Manderly, son of Wyman Manderly, a Blackwood, a Flint, and a Frey, to escort her. These loyal Stark houses get slaughtered at the Red Wedding. In the books, Renly has his own Kingsguard called the Rainbow Guard. When Brienne wins the tourney during Catelyn's arrival, she becomes Renly's Blue Guard, with Loras as his Green Guard and the other 5 making up the rest of the Rainbow. All the scenes with Renly, Loras, and Margaery never happen in the books. In fact, the relationship between Loras and Renly is never shown in any of the novels. It is only hinted at by them praying alone in Renly's tent and asking not to be disturbed. Did you know in the books, Winterfell is an ancient, sprawling complex of walls, towers, courtyards, and buildings, surrounded by 2 massive granite walls with a deep moat between them, sometimes filled with water, sometimes not. Within the walls, the castle contains the Great Keep, a sept, a godswood with a heart tree, and multiple towers like the Broken Tower, which is what Bran was pushed off when he saw Jaime and Cersei in the first episode, and a maester's turret where Luwin lived. The temperature is regulated by hot springs beneath the ground that are heated geothermally. The castle also contains a crypt where all the Starks are buried in stone tombs. It is theorized that this is to prevent the Children of the Forest from accessing dead Starks' memories and warging abilities through the stone and bronze swords. And maybe this is why Lyanna was buried down there. Did you know in the books, Theon has 3 super interesting and terrifying uncles that the show cut out entirely. When Theon returned to the Iron Islands in Book 2, it is not his sister Asha who greets him at the harbour, but his uncle, Aeron Damphier, a priest of the drowned god who who baptizes him almost immediately and provides context as to what has transpired since Theon became a ward of the Starks, while he takes him to the castle. We find out later that Aerion became such a devout priest because Euron used to touch and force himself on Aeron and their dead brother Euron while they were children. Euron tells him, "I could hear you praying from outside the door. I always wondered, were you praying that I would choose you or that I would pass you by?" Yikes. Did you know in the books, during Tyrion's private meeting with Cersei at the small council chamber, they discuss several events that greatly angered their father. Firstly, Tyrion chides her for the shoddy treatment of Barristan Selmy in dismissing him as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and naming the Hound in his place. Cersei explains that Joffrey wanted someone to blame for Robert's death, and Varys suggested Sir Barristan, probably because he knew it was stupid. It gave Jaime command of the Kingsguard and a seat on the small council, and Joffrey is quite fond of the Hound. Tyrion points out that Selmy is a legendary figure in Westeros and gives prestige and honor to whomever he serves. Selmy is now likely to join one of their enemies, which Cersei admits she had not considered. Tyrion mentions that Sir Barristan killed 2 gold cloaks who had been sent to apprehend him without his sword. Did you know in the books, Theon never contemplates warning Robb of his father's invasion plan because in the books, Theon always saw himself as a Greyjoy and only comes to regret his decision once abandoned by his father and alone in Winterfell. He also never tried to dissuade his father from his plan of invasion. He only had one reservation regarding the Northern Lords, but Balon dismisses it entirely. Theon is given 8 ships, not 1. Balon orders that he will be accompanied by Aerion and Dagmir, who is a real father figure to Theon. Balon reveals his plan not only to Theon and Asha, but Balon's brothers, Aerion and Victarion, who are present at the meeting too. Balon orders Victarion to seize Moat Caitlin. In the books, Theon never accuses his father for giving him away, so show Theon is actually kind of a more interesting character than Book 2 Theon. Did you know in the books, Ned Stark was not good looking, and Catelyn even admitted it took many years for her to come to love him since he is shorter and less handsome than his older brother, Brandon, had been, but in her own words, stated that Ned has a good sweetheart beneath his solemn face. So, despite Sean Bean being the perfect actor to play Ned Stark, like Peter Dinklage for Tyrion Lannister and Rose Leslie for Ygritte, the actors are too good looking compared to their book counterparts. Even Jon Snow is not described as terribly good looking compared to his handsome half-brother, Robb Stark. Sean Bean is also incredibly funny, like the scene where he refuses to change his clothes for his first small council meeting, is something that Book Ned did not do, or throwing shade at Varys during the small council.
Did you know in the books, Jon Snow does not describe Ygritte as good looking? At first, he thinks she is ugly with a round face, crooked white teeth, small hands, and a pug nose. And even her eyes, which are a pretty blue-grey, Jon Snow thinks are too far apart. However, her most distinctive feature is her thick, shapy mop of curly bright red hair. Jon, who is 3 years younger and half a foot taller, thinks Ygritte is short for her age. However, he only starts sleeping with her because she vouched for him and saved his life. So he does it thinking that he is still keeping his oath to the Night's Watch. However, as time passes, he starts to find her more and more attractive, especially when he makes her smile. He genuinely grows to love her, despite trying everything he can to convince himself not to.
Did you know in the books, Asha is considered very beautiful? As a child, Asha was a skinny girl with knobbed knees and a face full of pimples. However, in her mid-20s, Asha is lean and long-legged with dark eyes and black hair cut short. Her face is thin with a big, sharp nose and wind-chafed skin. Theon believes her hawk-like nose is too big and sharp for her small face, but he feels that her wicked smile makes up for it. Asha is wild and headstrong. There is a boldness to the way she walks. Part saunter, part sway. Asha personally leads her men into battle. She captains her own ship, Blackwind, and has the devotion of her crew, who take a perverse pride in the deeds of their female captain. According to Asha, half of them love her like a daughter, while the other half want to sleep with her. Did you know in the books, Tyrion was described by everyone as being hideous to look at even before he loses his nose during the Battle of Blackwater Bay? In the books, Tyrion is half a foot shorter than the actor Peter Dinklage, with stunted legs, stubby fingers, and a protruding forehead. He has mismatched eyes of green and black, so rumors spread that he has an evil eye. However, people use this as evidence of him being a Targaryen, and his black eye is actually a really dark purple. Tyrion's thin hair is fair and flaxen, so blonde it can appear white. Again, more evidence of being the product of Aerys Targaryen forcing himself on Joanna Lannister. He has some strands of black hair, however, and if he grows a beard, it is yellow, white, and black. Tyrion's unique stare has been said to make people uncomfortable, which he uses to his advantage.
Did you know in the books, Roose is brutal to Ramsay? Where everyone in the north is afraid of Ramsay, Roose just humiliates him to his face without even batting an eye. Roose demands Theon, but Ramsay tries to deny him, and Roose says, "All you have, I gave you. You would do well to remember that, bastard. Before you make me rue the day I raped your mother." All Ramsay can do is twitch his lips and hand Theon over. Roose then tells Theon that while hunting, he murdered Ramsay's mother's husband and took her while her husband was swaying above them, but looks back on the day with more annoyance than anything else, since the fox got away and his horse came up lame, calling it a pretty dreadful day. And the reader suddenly realizes that Roose is just a different kind of evil to Ramsay. Did you know, in the books, there is a scene where Cersei makes a proposition to Ned after he discovers the truth about her incestuous relationship and confronts her in the Godswood of King's Landing. Ned tells her that he knows what he must do. In response, Cersei places her hand on his leg, just above the knee, and suggests that a true man does what he will, not what he must. Her touch carries a hint of seduction as she mentions the need for a strong hand in ruling the realm, considering that Joffrey will not reach adulthood for several years and her desire is to avoid another war. She proceeds to touch his face and hair before Ned replies, "Did you make the same offer to Jon Arryn?" Cersei pulls her hand away and she slaps him. And this is where Cersei gives her, "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die" speech. Did you know in the books, Pycelle had a glorious long beard that made him look sage and wise. However, during his arrest, Tyrion has it cut off, which Cersei describes as the cruelest thing that Tyrion could have done, since now Pycelle looks like a wrinkly old man. In the books, Bronn is not there when Tyrion tells Shagga to cut off Pycelle's manhood and feed it to the goats. The threat frightens Pycelle so much that he wets the bed. He then admits that Maester Coleman treated Jon Arryn with purges, and that might have cured Arryn, so Pycelle sent him away, since Cersei needed Arryn dead. In the books, after arresting Pycelle, Tyrion inspects his collection of medicines that includes lethal poisons and takes some of the jars. Pycelle mentions this in Tyrion's trial, and this is what convinces Kevan Lannister of Tyrion's guilt. Did you know in the books, the long conversation between Arya and Yoren never happens. Yoren never mentions any of his relatives, and it is also not mentioned how and why he joined the Watch. It is not Yoren's story that gives Arya the idea to recite repeatedly the names of the people she wants dead. It is her own idea, figuring that if she lets herself forget even one of them, she'll never find him again to kill him. King Joffrey I Baratheon, Chipswick, Sir Gregor Clegane, Dunsen, Queen Cersei Lannister, Sir Amory Lorch, Sir Ilyn Payne, Polliver, Raff the Sweetling, the Tickler, Sir Meryn Trant, Sandor Clegane, and Whis. The only ones still alive are Dunsen, Sir Ilyn Payne, and Meryn Trant. Did you know in the books, there is a scene where Arya and Gendry are taken to a brothel called the Peach, situated in Stony Sept. Arya remarks, "I bet this is a brothel." Gendry replies, "You don't even know what a brothel is." Arya snaps back, "I do so. It's like an inn with girls." Among the girls at the brothel is Bella, who happens to be a bastard daughter of King Robert. She flirts with Gendry and even offers to sleep with him for free, but he declines the offer because Arya is present. Later, Arya asks Gendry why he referred to her as his sister, and he takes it as an insult, stating that he is too lowborn to be considered kin to a highborn lady like Arya.
He then teasingly mentions that he might go and sleep with Bella just to annoy Arya. Did you know in the books, Tyrion does not tell Pycelle outright that he intends to wed Marcilla to Trystane? It is written in the letters he gives Pycelle to send to Doran Martell. Pycelle reads the letters before sending them, as Tyrion expected he would. The scene where Tyrion tests Pycelle, Varys, and Littlefinger happens slightly differently in the books. He tells Varys that he plans to offer the Martells gold, land, a seat on the small council, Elia's murderer, and to foster Tommen in Sunspear. In the book, after arresting Pycelle, Tyrion does not only blame Pycelle for betraying Jon Arryn and Ned Stark, but also for betraying Aerys, Rhaegar, Robert, and himself. To Tyrion's surprise, Pycelle reveals that he was the one who bid Aerys open his gates to the Lannister troops. Pycelle also admits he would have finished Robert off had he not been so fatally injured by the boar. Did you know in the books, the battle between Yoren and his recruits and Sir Amory Lorch is significantly different? Yoren and his charges use a small stone keep to defend themselves. A small battle ensues on the walls. Lorch is not looking for Gendry, but is after Beric Dondarrion and attacks them without any reason or provocation. Arya, Gendry, Hot Pie, and Lomi escape the assault and do not witness Yoren's death. Several days later, they are captured by Sir Gregor Clegane and then taken to Harrenhal. Lomi is killed by Rafford, aka Raff the Sweetling, not by Polliver. Later, Arya and her companions find Yoren's corpse, and it is evident he died fighting. Arya does not use Lomi as a scapegoat for Gendry in the books, because their captors are not looking for him and do not care about the identity of their captives. Anyway, subscribe for more. Did you know in the books, the character Talissa does not exist? Instead, the girl Robb Stark falls in love with and eventually marries is Jean Westerling, daughter of Lord Gawain Westerling from the Crag, a minor vassal house of the Westerlands. After Robb marches west to defeat the Lannisters at the Crag, he disappears from the book and his romance with Jean is entirely off-screen. Once he returns to Riverrun, he is already married to Jean. She is not a battlefield healer, but she does nurse Robb back to health after he takes an arrow to the arm storming the Westerling castle. However, Jaime finds out that Jean's mum was giving her daughter Moon Tea so she would not become pregnant with Robb's child, and was secretly conspiring with the Lannisters. Jean is also still alive in the books and on her way to Castle Rock with Edmure Tully. Did you know in the books, Tyrion's motivation to murder Tywin is different from what is depicted in the TV show? It is not solely because Tywin was involved with Shae, but rather due to a revelation from Jaime after Tyrion's release. Jaime informs Tyrion that his first wife, Tysha, whom Tyrion believed was a whore paid by Jaime, was actually married to him out of genuine love. During the confrontation with Tywin, Tyrion emphasizes that they are discussing Tysha, not Shae, and urges his father not to use the term whore. When Tywin refers to Tysha as a whore, which she was not, Tyrion reaches his breaking point and ends up killing his father. However, it is believed Sam meets Tysha in Braavos, and she is working as a prostitute with a 14-year-old daughter named Lana, who has blonde hair and is the right age to be Tyrion's daughter and potentially the heir to Castle Rock. Did you know in the books, Arya Stark helped Roose Bolton take Harrenhal from the Lannisters? After Jaime's defeat, Lord Tywin Lannister camps at Harrenhal while Roose takes the Riverlands. Robb attacks the Westerlands, drawing Tywin out of Harrenhal. Tywin names Sir Amory Lorch as Castellan and marches out, leaving a garrison of only 200 men, 100 Lannister men-at-arms and 100 brave companions, whose leader is Vargo Hoat. Vargo returns to Harrenhal with at least 100 captives, claiming to have beaten Roose Bolton trying to cross the Trident. Arya Stark, seeing an opportunity, blackmails Jaqen H'ghar into helping her free the northern prisoners. Together they kill Amory's guards and free the northern prisoners. Unknown to Sir Amory Lorch and independent of Arya and Jaqen, Vargo Hoat had approached Roose Bolton and struck a deal to turn over the castle to the Starks. The brave companions turn on their former Lannister allies, killing them in their bed. Did you know in the books, it is Boris Blunt rather than Meryn Trant who beats and strips Sansa in the throne room at Joffrey's behest? The Hound yells enough during the spectacle. Tyrion, who is also accompanied by Timett, scolds and threatens Blunt in the same way he does to Trant in the TV show. Additionally, Sansa's beating is toned down in the TV series. In the novel, she is stripped naked, as the character was below the required age set by UK decency laws. In the books, Joffrey commanded the Hound to hit Sansa, but Dantas tries to help her by smashing a melon on her head so Joffrey would end her punishment there. However, it doesn't, and Joffrey still wants her beaten. But it's noticeable that the Hound completely ignored his order to do the beating himself. Did you know in the books, Daenerys Targaryen and her Khalasar are let immediately into the city of Qarth, unlike in the TV show? The city residents warmly welcome Daenerys and her followers. It is also implied in the books that Xaro is homosexual, because when he offers to sleep with Daenerys, she rejects him, and he looks almost relieved. In Qarth, Daenerys meets Quaithe, one of the most mysterious characters in the book series, who warns her, "You must leave this city soon, or you will never be permitted to leave it at all." Daenerys realizes that Quaithe wants her to go to Asshai, and when she asks why, the Shadowbinder tells her it is there she will find the truth. The show had Quaithe only interact with Jorah, which is a shame since, in the book, she sends visions and warnings to Daenerys through glass candle magic. Did you know in the show, the Battle of Oxcross takes place entirely off-screen, but in the books, Lord Tywin Lannister had tasked his cousin, Sir Stafford Lannister, with training a new Lannister army at Castle Rock. Robb's host invades the Westerlands through a previously unknown goat track found by his direwolf, Greywind. Thinking himself safe in his own lands, Stafford does not bother to set sentries. During the night, Robb sends men to cut the lines that hold Stafford's horses. When Robb sets loose Greywind, the horses are maddened by the scent and trample tents and men alike while trying to flee. With confusion sending Lannister men fleeing everywhere, Robb sends in his own cavalry. The battle is more a rout than a real encounter, as the untrained and surprised Lannister army fail to put up much resistance. The Lannister army's defeat is so great that the Westerlands are greatly weakened. Did you know in the books, the Lannisters never sent Littlefinger or anyone else to Renly's camp? Peter Baelish is sent to treat with the Tyrells, but in Highgarden, and only long after Renly's death. Catelyn and Littlefinger never saw each other again after their meeting at King's Landing, where he lied to her about the dagger. Catelyn does not receive Eddard's bones at Renly's camp. They are brought to Riverrun later as a gift from Tyrion, and Littlefinger had nothing to do with it. We don't actually know what happens to Ned's bones since they were sent north just before the Ironborn seized Moat Caitlin, and we know they never reached the north because Lady Barbary Dustin planned to feed the bones to her dogs. But they never arrived at Barrowtown, which is where the bones should have gone after Moat Caitlin, meaning their location remains a mystery. Did you know in the books, the reason Renly and Stannis meet is because Stannis has besieged Storm's End, the seat of Renly. Catelyn and Stannis are the first to gather. Renly joins the meeting later, perhaps deliberately, as some kind of game. The first to arrive must wait on the other. In the book, the parley is much longer. Stannis tells Catelyn and Renly about the investigation he and Jon Arryn conducted into the incestuous relationship between Jaime and Cersei. Renly dismisses that, but Catelyn believes Stannis. Moreover, she deduces the truth about Bran's fall. In the book, Stannis harshly says that Robb is a traitor just like Renly, and threatens that his day will come as well. What's so annoying about this is Stannis should have just let Renly march on King's Landing and take it, before killing him with a shadow baby. Did you know in the books, Shiera Seastar is both the most beautiful and mysterious character in the A Song of Ice and Fire book series? Born a bastard into House Targaryen, Shiera is renowned for her stunning beauty, with long silvery hair and mismatched eyes, one violet and one green. Her allure is further enhanced by her intellect and wit. She is known to have been a mistress to both Bloodraven, probably the most dangerous Targaryen to ever live, and Bittersteel, one of the most ferocious Targaryen fighters of all time. And both men subsequently fought wars against each other. Despite her relationships with powerful men, Shiera's true loyalties and ambitions remain a mystery, and her ability to manipulate those around her is legendary. She is rumored to have practiced dark magic and may still be alive in the main series as Quaithe, the mysterious woman from Asshai whom Daenerys meets in Qarth. Did you know in the books, the sentence, "A naked man has few secrets, but a flayed man's got none," is not said by Roose Bolton to Robb Stark, but is said by Ramsay to Theon, while the two of them hold Winterfell in a clash of kings. Roose is not with Robb in the Riverlands, but instead is commanding the Second Northern Army that Tywin defeated with Tyrion at the Green Fork, and he is the one to take Harrenhal, not Robb, like we saw in Season 3, Episode 1. Roose takes advantage of his position as commander of the Second Northern Army to kill all Northern soldiers more loyal to the Starks than Bolton's, to help plan the Red Wedding, and ultimately allow Jaime to go on his way to King's Landing after securing his position as Warden of the North after the Stark demise. Did you know in the books, Shae is roughly 18 years old and stands just a bit taller than 5 feet, making her 1 foot taller than Tyrion. She possesses a slender and attractive figure with striking, dark, and expressive eyes complemented by her short, dark hair. Her smile is versatile, easily transitioning from a shy and innocent expression to one that's insolent and mischievous. Shae has a penchant for luxurious attire and jewelry. For instance, in the second book, Tyrion lodges her in an opulent manor. However, when Tyrion decides to assign her to work in the kitchens for her own safety, her annoyance becomes evident. She becomes increasingly frustrated upon realizing that she won't be returning to the lavish manor, but instead must serve as Lolly's maid. The show had it be Sansa. Shae doesn't hold back in expressing her disdain, often speaking very cruelly about Lolly's behind her back to Tyrion.
Did you know in the books, the assassination of Renly Baratheon is quite different from the series? The shadow is described to appear like the common two-dimensional shadow of Renly himself on the wall, rather than the black three-dimensional one seen and later described to resemble Stannis in the TV show. Catelyn describes the shadow baby from her perspective as only the king's, or Renly's, shadow shifting against the silken walls. The shadow is noticed to be abnormal because it acts differently from Renly himself. The shadow raises the sword, while Renly himself still has his real sword in the sheath. In the assassination, Renly's steel gorget is cut through like cheesecloth, and his throat is sliced cleanly, while the shadow makes no physical contact with him. In the TV series, he is stabbed in the back while he is not wearing any armor.
Did you know in the books, there are 2 Shadow Baby assassinations? The first is never seen and kills Renly in his camp. The second time is when Davos rows Melisandre into Storm's End, which has refused to bend the knee to Stannis Baratheon despite Renly's death. The second Shadow Baby kills Sir Courtney Penrose, the Castellan Renly placed in charge because he knew the man would never bend the knee to Stannis. The reason why Davos had to row Melisandre into a cavern underneath Storm's End is that there are supposed protective spells built into the castle walls. In the books, Melisandre does not ask Davos if he loves his wife, nor does she state that he had known other women. Instead, she asks Davos if he is a good man, and he answers, "I am kind to my wife, but I have known other women."
Did you know in the books, we had none of the Tyrell scenes that we saw in Season 2 of the show? For example, the scene between Littlefinger and Marjorie did not happen. Then the Loras, Marjorie and Littlefinger scene at Renly's deathbed does not happen either. Essentially, Book 3, A Storm of Swords, is our first proper introduction to Marjorie and Loras Tyrell. Also, in the books, Marjorie never claims that Brienne killed Renly. Likewise, Loras does not believe that Stannis killed Renly. He believes that Brienne killed him. He only comes to believe in Stannis' guilt much later, after confronting Brienne and Jaime when they return to King's Landing, and eventually agreeing to listen to Brienne's account of what happened when Renly was murdered. Loras then repents deeply over killing Robar Royce and Sir Emmon Key, since he blamed them for Renly's death. Did you know in the books, Cleos Frey, Alton Lannister's book counterpart, not Littlefinger, is the one who brings Catelyn the Lannisters' offer to exchange Jaime for her daughters. The conversation takes place at Riverrun, not at Renly's camp. Cleos tells Catelyn that Sansa is held at the Red Keep and admits he has no idea what has become of Arya. He does not attempt to persuade Catelyn to act behind Robb's back. Jaime also doesn't murder Cleos Frey in the books. Instead, he travels with Jaime and Brienne on their way to King's Landing. However, the trio is ambushed by outlaw archers. Cleos is hit by arrows, and his horse spooks and drags him across the ground,
killing him. Jaime uses his Cleo's sword to fight Brienne before the two are captured by the brave companions. Frustrated by Brienne's stubbornness while riding from Harrenhal to King's Landing, Jaime finds himself unexpectedly missing Cleos. Did you know in the books, it is actually Varys who suggests the working girls for Joffrey, not Bronn? The scene where Joffrey brutalizes Ross and the other girls never unfolds. In the books, it is unclear if this suggestion is ever acted on. Show Joffrey is actually probably worse than Book Joffrey, since Book Joffrey is quite young, and despite being cruel, he comes off as more of a child who doesn't know any better. Whereas Show Joffrey feels like a young man who knows exactly what he wants and has more scenes than Book Joffrey to show off just how psychotic and irredeemable he is as a person. Also, it doesn't help that Jack Gleeson is such a good actor, and the show goes hard on making one of its biggest appeals being Tyrion's takedowns of Joffrey because he is so lovable to hate. Did you know in the books, Riverrun was an awesomely designed castle built in the middle of 3 rivers, making it extremely hard to besiege since you need to place a small army on the 3 bits of land surrounding it. This is why Robb Stark was able to smash Jaime's forces here, since the Lannister army was divided into 3, and many of them drowned trying to come to the aid of each other while the Northerners were attacking. Meanwhile, those inside the castle then launched an attack themselves under the command of Titus Blackwood. So Brendan Tully, leading Robb's van, attacks the Lannister camp north of the Tumblestone at night. Meanwhile, Robb leads 2 columns of armoured horses, including Umbers and Mallisters, from the west and overran the camp between the rivers, leading to a massive Stark victory that was only possible because Robb had already defeated Jaime at the Whispering Woods beforehand. Did you know in the books, Stannis and Davos do not discuss what transpired in the cave? In fact, it is unclear if Stannis knew that Melisandre created the Shadow. It is Lord Bryce Caron, not Davos, who dissuades Stannis from bringing Melisandre to the battle, since afterwards she will be able to claim it was her victory, not his. This is why Stannis doesn't blame her after losing the battle. Davos does not lead Stannis' fleet into battle. It is led by Sir Amory Florent, Stannis' brother-in-law. He is the one who leads Stannis' forces into the trap, whereas Davos would have sent scouting ships first. Salladhor Saan is placed in the rear, so he will collect no plunder if the city falls. However, instead, his ships are untouched after the battle and provide Stannis' escape by being outside Tyrion's chain and remaining loyal to Stannis' cause. Did you know in the books, Theon persuades Dagmere to stray from the orders? In the TV show, it is the other way around. In the books, Theon first attacks Stony Shore as he is ordered by his father, then destroys a Tallheart force which has been sent to deal with the Ironborn. Both battles have been omitted from the TV show. Only afterwards does Theon come up with the idea to send Cleftjaw with most of their force to raid Torrhen Square as a distraction, while Theon takes Winterfell with 30 men. The plan works as Sir Roderick Castle takes 600 men from Winterfell's garrison to Torrhen Square, not 200 like in the show. Dagmere and Theon also have a really touching scene in the books where Theon tells Dagmere he is no craven. Dagmere says he knows this, and Theon asks, "Does my father?"
Did you know in the books, Jaime Lannister is described as the most handsome man in Westeros and is 31 years old with shiny blonde hair and emerald green eyes, almost as pretty as Cersei. Whereas in the show, his hair started to go brown and was never the same golden blonde from the books. Now, Jaime's overall character arc remains consistent in both the books and the show. However, his relationship with Brienne of Tarth is more complex and nuanced in the books. The showrunners changed Jaime by having him travel to Dorne on a mission to retrieve his daughter Marcilla, which is something book Jaime would never go and do because it is so stupid. Show Jaime regresses in a way that would go completely against Jaime's internal consistency in the books, since after finding out Cersei cheated on him, he has all but given up on her.
Did you know in the books, when Tyrion visits the Alchemist Guild, Bronn does not accompany him. It is Helen who warns him of the dangers of putting the wildfire in the hands of untrained soldiers. The alchemist found a cache of 200 jars of wildfire under the Grand Sept of Baelor, and then 300 jars under the Dragon Pit. This was intended to burn everyone alive in King's Landing. Queen Regent Cersei Lannister commissions a great quantity of wildfire for the defences of King's Landing. The alchemists report an unexplained increase in the effectiveness of their spells, allowing them to create the substance more quickly. Hallen notes that the last time it was this easy to create wildfire was during the time of the dragons, i.e. since the birth of Daenerys' dragons.
Did you know in the books, Tywin Lannister is described as having a bald head with a fringe of hair around his ears, while show Tywin is not entirely bald and has no whiskers. In the books, Tywin is depicted as being 55 years old, whereas in the show, Charles Dance feels at least 10 years older than that. In the books, it becomes clear by the end that the reason why Tywin Lannister despised Tyrion so much was because the two are more alike than either of them would like to admit. Whereas Jaime is everything Tywin could want in an heir, but the eldest Lannister son doesn't want it, and prefers to remain a Kingsguard knight, whereas Tyrion and Cersei share Tywin's desire for power and control, but he doesn't like them. The people of King's Landing also hate Tywin and blame him for the sack of King's Landing after Aerys opened the gates to him.
Did you know in the books, Theon is given command of 8 longships instead of 1, like in the TV show. However, his uncle Aeron Damphia is sent to watch over him. Theon is also given Dagmere Cleftjaw, who was an infamous reaver and captain, not Theon's first mate, like in the TV show. Dagmere has a ship of his own and is the master of arms at Pike. Theon grew up calling him uncle. Dagmere loves Theon and is a real father figure to him, unlike his actual father or Ned Stark. His appearance is also drastically different. Dagmere is called the Cleft Jaw because he was hit in the face with an axe. He recovered, but his mouth and jaw were split, making his smile terrifying. In the books, neither Black Lauren nor any of Theon's crew treats Theon scornfully at that stage of the plotline because he is their prince and Dagmere is there.
Did you know in the books, Joanna Lannister, Tyrion, Jaime, and Cersei's mother married Tywin even though they were first cousins? On their wedding day, Tywin was seen smiling, which was a first. At the wedding feast, Aerys drunkenly japed about how it was a pity the first night tradition was banned, and took unwanted liberties with Joanna in the bedding ritual when the men at the feast had to disrobe the bride. Not long thereafter, Joanna was dismissed by Queen Rhaella Targaryen from her service in King's Landing. While Rhaella turned a blind eye towards most of her husband's infidelities, she did not approve when it concerned one of her own ladies. Joanna departed at once. Her marriage to Tywin was a happy one, and she became Tywin's trusted counselor and companion. Her influence on her husband was such that people say that Tywin ruled the 7 kingdoms as hand, but was ruled at home by his lady wife. Did you know in the books, there is a theory that Bran messed up Aerys Targaryen's head the same way he did to Hodor. This is because Aerys was described as a handsome, charming, and generous young man. He, Tywin, and Stefford Baratheon, Robert, Stannis, and Renly's dad, were all friends and fought in the final Blackfyre rebellion together. This is why Tywin became his hand and Stefford died trying to procure a wife for Aerys' heir, Rhaegar. However, after the defiance of Duskendale, Aerys started to go mad. Maybe because Bran was trying to prepare Westeros for the long night by procuring as much wildfire as possible and even trying to birth more dragons, which are the 2 things Aerys was obsessed with doing. However, like Hodor, the mind control went too far and Aerys lost all semblance of who he was as a person, since he became obsessed with fires and dragons. Did you know in the books, Jon Snow is only 14 years old, and he is not as good looking as Kit Harington. Jon has more Stark-like features than any of his half-brothers. He is graceful and quick, and has the long face of the Starks, with dark brown hair and grey eyes so dark they almost seem black. Jon resembles his father, Lord Eddard Stark, the most, and this is another reason why Catelyn Stark resents him so much, since he looks more like Ned than any of the sons she gave her lord husband, with the only exception being Arya. Even Tyrion comments that Jon looks so much like a Stark that whoever Jon's mother was, she left little of herself in her son's appearance. Jon is quite sullen in the books and is quick to sense a slight.
Jon is also not close to Theon Greyjoy, unlike in the TV show. Did you know in the books, when Joanna gave birth to Cersei and Jaime, King Aerys ordered Tywin to bring Joanna and the children to King's Landing, but Tywin did not let this happen. Joanna attended the anniversary tourney in King's Landing in 272 AC, held to celebrate Aerys' 10th year on the Iron Throne. Aerys insulted Joanna by asking her if nursing her children had ruined her breasts, and the king refused the outraged Tywin's resignation the next day. At some point within the next year, Joanna's servant caught Jaime and Cersei together, engaged in an underage activity. Joanna sent the maid away, moved Jaime's chamber to the other side of Castle Rock, and put a guard outside of Cersei's chamber. She then warned her twins that they must never do such a thing again, or else she would be forced to tell their father, but died before she ever could. Did you know in the books, Shireen Baratheon is 9 years old and is regarded by everyone as a sad, sweet, gentle child. She is also not considered pretty, like her mother, Selyse Florent. She has blue eyes, but inherited her father's square, jutting jaw and her mother's large ears. Grayscale has left half of her left cheek and most of her neck covered in cracked and flaking grey and black stony skin. She has suffered from nightmares since infancy. Even though George R.R. Martin told the showrunners that Shireen would be burned, there is no way that could happen because Stannis is trapped in the snow since she is at Castle Black and there's no way she could reach Winterfell to help decide the battle. Instead, she'll most likely be burned when the others invade as a last-ditch effort to stop the Long Night or wake sleeping dragons. Did you know in the books, Aegon was tall, broad-shouldered, and powerful in appearance, with purple eyes and short-cut silver gold hair. He was very charismatic and commanding. During his conquest, he always wore black fire and a crown, made of a simple circlet of Valyrian steel, set with big square cut rubies. Aegon was seen as an enigma. He was a solitary person whose only friend was Orys Baratheon, who was widely believed to be his bastard half-brother. The king was a great warrior who only rode his dragon, Balerion, for battle or travel and never entered tourneys. Aegon remained faithful to his sisters and left governance in their hands and only took command when necessary. While he was harsh with those who defied him, he was generous to those that bent the knee. Aegon is not considered to have been particularly pious. According to a semi-canon source, he only followed the faith of the Seven for political reasons. Did you know in the books, if Ned had just told Robert Baratheon the truth on his deathbed, he might have won the Game of Thrones. However, it all depends on whether the Kingsguard would obey Cersei or a dying Robert in that moment. For example, we know Cersei has 3 Kingsguard knights in her possession: Jaime, who is away in the Westerlands, Meryn Trant, and Boris Blunt. We know Mandon Moore is from the Vale and loyal to Littlefinger. And finally, the last 3 are loyal to Robert: Barristan Selmy, Aerys Oakheart, and Preston Greenfield. So, if Robert ordered Cersei arrested, Trant and Blunt might try and warn Cersei to run away. Moore might report to Littlefinger, and only 3 of the Kingsguard would have obeyed the command without question. Cersei would not have gone willingly, so a fight would have ensued, and either Cersei is able to escape with some of her children, or she is arrested. Did you know in the books, Ramsay Snow helped Theon hold Winterfell against Roderick Castle. After the capture of Winterfell by Theon Greyjoy and his Ironborn, they find a prisoner named Reek, or Ramsay Snow, in the dungeons. After a vow of service to House Greyjoy, Reek, or Ramsay, becomes one of Theon's more trusted attendants, assisting Theon in his hunt in the Wolfswood to bring the escaped Bran and Rickon back to Winterfell. Reek orchestrates Theon's cover-up of the Stark boys' escape by killing 2 millers' sons and then flaying the corpses to avoid recognition. Theon presents their flayed corpses as the Starks, with their heads mounted on spikes over the castle walls. With the approval of Theon, Reek kills 3 Ironborn who know the truth about the bodies. Theon contemplates killing Reek too, but thinks better of it, fearing the servant had written and hidden an account of the truth. Did you know in the books, Renly planned to have Robert Baratheon put Cersei aside and marry Margaery Tyrell instead? This can be seen when Renly shows Ned a portrait of Margaery and asks if she looks like Lyanna. Ned tells him bluntly, no, probably because Margaery is more beautiful than Lyanna. and further evidence comes in Eddard 7, when Robert tells Ned that Renly has told him about the Knight of Flowers' lovely 14-year-old sister, Margaery. So maybe if Margaery had come to court and become one of Robert's favorites, kind of like Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, then Cersei's incest could have been exposed and she would have been put aside in favor of Margaery, and a war between the Tyrells and Lannisters would have erupted. However, with the Starks, Baratheon, and Tyrells, I think they would have come out on top. Did you know in the books, Tywin probably got one of the women at Chataya's brothel pregnant? The evidence for this comes from the secret entrance to her brothel, which Varys says was built because the tunnel was dug for another king's hand, whose honor would not allow him to enter such a house openly. The evidence for it being Tywin is how recently it was built and the hidden Lannister colors used. Old Shift X talks about it in his The Real Tyrion Lannister video. Anyway, the most obvious candidate to be Tywin's daughter is Marie, a girl with green eyes like Tywin. She has porcelain skin, long straight silvery hair, but is very serious, kind of like Tywin. The less likely candidate is Aelia, who is Chataya's 16-year-old daughter, who is less tall than her mother and was maybe conceived just before Tywin left King's Landing in 281 AC and was born in 282 AC. Did you know in the books, Laena Velaryon was considered to be one of the most beautiful women in Westeros? This was after Viserys had chosen not to marry her, but had he made the choice between her and Alicent after she had taken Vhagar to ride at the age of 14, that might have resulted in a different outcome, and the dance could have been between Laena instead of Alicent and Rhaenyra. Laena was beautiful like her mother and adventurous like her father. By 2 and 20, Laena had grown into a tall, slender, and beautiful woman. According to Mushroom, the court fool, she was almost as pretty as her brother. However, Laena loved to fly, and according to the Maester of Driftmark, she showed far more interest in flying than in boys. But she was smitten with Daemon Targaryen, who was the only male dragon rider in the world, besides her brother at the time. Did you know in the books, Tyrion and Cersei share one beautiful scene together when Tyrion says, "Stannis has sailed from Dragonstone." Cersei bolted to her feet, "And yet you sit there grinning like a Harvest Day pumpkin? We must send a bird to Harrenhal at once." Tyrion was laughing by then. She seized him by the shoulders and shook him. "Stop it. Are you mad or drunk? Stop it." It was all he could do to get out the words. "I can't," he gasped. "It's too funny. Stannis." "What? He hasn't sailed against us," Tyrion managed. "He's laid siege to Storm's End. Renly is riding to meet him." For a moment she stared incredulously. She then lifts him up and whirls him around, giving him a hug. And Tyrion thinks to himself, is this the Cersei that Jaime sees? When she smiled, he saw how beautiful she was. Did you know in the books, Catelyn is 35 years old and is beautiful, with fair hair, long auburn hair, and blue eyes. She has long fingers and high cheekbones. Catelyn is a head shorter than her younger brother, Edmure, and slightly taller than her eldest child, Robb, who was 14 in the books. Catelyn and Lysa also practiced kissing with Petyr in the Godswood, where Petyr attempted to stick his tongue in their mouths, an attempt which Catelyn halted, but Lysa both allowed and enjoyed. Catelyn and Lysa played together as girls, and once they made mud pies and served them to Petyr, who ate them and was sick for a week. On their way back from Seaguard to Riverrun, Catelyn and Lysa got lost in the mist and were eventually found by Petyr. She never spoke to Petyr after his duel with Brandon and burnt his letter. Did you know in the books, Theon threatened to hang a 10-year-old girl from the Winterfell battlements because she was the daughter of Rodrik Castle, who had been sent to take back the castle. Sir Rodrik is horrified at Theon's tactics. However, Theon knows this won't work for long. Luwin advises Theon to surrender, stating that Rodrik would allow Theon to take the Black. However, a force of Bolton men approached the besiegers, apparently to join them in the siege, but the newcomers then attack Rodrik's host. After killing them, the Bolton's leader reveals to Theon that he is not Reek, but actually the still-living Ramsay Snow. The bastard of Bolton explains he killed Rodrik by chopping his left arm when the knight offered it in friendship. Ramsay then orders his men to kill Theon's Ironborn and burn Winterfell. which would later be blamed on Theon and the Ironborn. Did you know in the books, Jon was tricked into sparing Ygritte's life? This was because Qhorin Halfhand recognized that the only way to stop Mance was to get inside his army, and the only way to do that was to get one of the Night's Watch to desert. This is why Qhorin left Jon to execute Ygritte alone, because he knew he wouldn't do it. After Jon let Ygritte go, he joined up with the rest of Qhorin's scouting party, unlike in the show where he and Ygritte had a little adventure together. One by one, Qhorin's scouting party dies off until it is just him and Jon. He then tells Jon that he knows Jon spared the girl and that he will need to go over to the Free Folk. Jon reluctantly agrees, and when the time comes, Rattleshirt tells Jon to kill Qhorin Halfhand, which Jon does, realizing this was always Qhorin's plan. Did you know in the books, Aegon the Conqueror married both his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys. However, he was only supposed to marry his older sister, Visenya, as per Targaryen tradition, but he might have loved his younger sister, Rhaenys, and decided to reintroduce the old Valyrian tradition of polygamy to marry her too. Visenya is described as cold, harsh, and unforgiving. However, it might have been that she was jealous of her sister since she was the third wheel in the relationship. Aegon spent 10 nights with Rhaenys for every one he spent with Visenya. However, Visenya clearly loved Aegon and did everything she could to protect him. She was the one who established his Kingsguard to protect him. She continually rode with him into battle and risked her life for his. This sister rivalry ultimately culminated in their sons, Aenys and Maegor, who were both very different from each other. Did you know in her youth, Lysa was a pretty, slender, high-breasted girl that even Jaime might have married? However, after her political marriage to Jon Arryn, she grew thick of waist by her early 30s, mostly due to her many pregnancies, miscarriages, and stillbirths. As a young girl, Lysa had been a soft, shy, and timid girl, prone to tongue-tied silences and fits of giggles. Her years at King's Landing changed her significantly, however, turning her into a woman who was proud, fearful, cruel, dreamy, reckless, impulsive, and unpredictable. Lysa had never been brave in her youth, which did not change during adulthood. Despite being 2 years younger than her sister Catelyn, Lysa looks 10 years older. Her face has become pale and puffy, and she now paints and powders it. She has the blue eyes of House Tully. Did you know in the books, Ramsay saved Theon from the Relief Stark force sent to take back Winterfell led by Roderick Castle? Following the battle, Ramsay rides to the castle gates and presents the corpses of Roderick, Tallheart, and Serwyn to an onlooking Theon as a sign of his loyalty. Theon opens the gates, and this is where Ramsay betrays Theon by removing his red helmet and revealing he is the son of Roose Bolton. He tells Theon that he would much enjoy the use of his bed warmer, Kyra, and knocks him to the floor when Theon protests, telling his men to save Big Walder and Little Walder Frey and burn the rest. Ramsay carries out a great sack of Winterfell, murdering many of its inhabitants in cold blood, slaughtering the remaining Ironmen and capturing Theon in the process. Bran and Rickon emerge from the crypts of Winterfell after the Boltons depart. Did you know in the books, there is a theory that the riot of King's Landing was caused to whisk Sansa and Tyrek Lannister away in the confusion. At the docks, Marcella doesn't cry when she is sent to Dorne. In fact, she comforts Tommen, who is crying. On the way back, Varys and Littlefinger might have bribed some people to throw poop at Joffrey, knowing what his reaction would be, and the incident of the dead baby might also have been staged. So, Jaime believes Varys knew about the riot, since he didn't go to the docks, and Tyrek Lannister disappeared afterwards, and he is an important Lannister hostage. Unlike in the show, some men try to pull Sansa off her horse, but the Hound kills them and gets her to safety. But this could have been the ideal situation to get Sansa out of the capital without anyone knowing it. Did you know in the books, House Lannister and House Gardener of the Reach raised an army to 55,000 to face off against Aegon the Conqueror, who only had 11,000 men. However, Aegon and his sister wives combined to unleash all 3 of their dragons on the Lannister and Reach army in what would later be called the Field of Fire. Afterwards, Loren Lannister barely escaped with his life and bent the knee to House Targaryen. However, House Gardener was wiped out, and Highgarden was given to the Tyrells. And this is why, throughout Targaryen history, they have always remained loyal to the Targaryens. In the Dance of the Dragons, the Tyrells chose not to fight for Alicent and the Greens, even though that was what was expected of them. And during Robert's Rebellion, they remained loyal despite having no reason to be, unlike the Martells who only fought because Elia was a hostage. Did you know in the books, Tyrion thinks he is smart for trusting Varys? But Varys is clearly taking him for a ride, and here's why. He helps Tyrion neutralize Pycelle because he is Cersei's crony, and Varys knows Cersei doesn't trust him. Tyrion helps bankrupt the Iron Throne even further through the Antlermen, who are supposed Stannis supporters inside the city that Varys accuses of treason with no evidence. They are then catapulted out to Stannis during the battle for Blackwater Bay, but it turns out later they all owe to the crown lots of money they now can't collect. Varys betrays Tyrion at his trial and only rescues Tyrion at sword point from Jaime. It is also suspected he timed Tyrion's escape to coincide with Shay's evening with Tywin, since why else would Varys casually mention how to reach the Tower of the Hand and for there to be a crossbow waiting for Tyrion to use? Did you know in the books, Catelyn and Jaime's conversation takes place in Riverrun's dungeons? Catelyn and Jaime make an agreement to speak the truth. She tells him about the war and what is happening to his family. Jaime, who is also getting increasingly drunk on the wine Catelyn sent to him, confesses many things. He is Cersei's lover. He is the father of Cersei's children. He attempted to murder Bran by pushing him from the window. Jaime affirms that neither he, Cersei, or Tyrion had anything to do with the cat's paw. Catelyn believes him since he has no reason to lie, having confessed to pushing Bran. To Catelyn's question about the dagger, Jaime says that Littlefinger had lost it to Robert, not to Tyrion. He independently confirms Tyrion's original defense, that he could not have lost the dagger because Tyrion never bets against his brother. Only then does Catelyn realize that Littlefinger lied to her. Did you know in the books, Rhaenys had black hair and lilac eyes and was considered a great beauty by all? Unlike in the show, she is proof that not all Targaryens have silver hair, which the show probably got rid of to emphasize that Rhaenyra's children were not Laenor's. When Rhaenys married Corlys Valyrion, he was 37 years old, and she was only 16. However, despite their age gap, the marriage was a happy one, and in the books, they always believed Rhaenyra's children were Laenor's, and there was no need to promise Jace and Luke to Baela and Rhaena to ensure Rhaenys and Corlys' support. Rhaenys had been the heir to the Iron Throne until the suspicious death of her father and the following Great Council. Rhaenys rode Mealy's, one of the fastest dragons and able to easily outpace Caraxes and Vhagar. This will be important in the Dance of the Dragons. Did you know in the books, Ancient Pike was originally built on a cliff jutting out into the sea, but over time, the cliff has eroded after thousands of years, leaving the castle's keeps and towers standing on 3 barren islands and a dozen small stacks of rock surrounded by water. The towers are connected by swaying rope bridges. The keep, its towers, and walls are made of the same grey-black stone of which the rest of the island is composed. Since there is no safe anchorage at Pike, ships sail to nearby Lordsport. Pike is so old that its original builders and lords are unknown. The castle was once larger, but unstable earth led to some portions of the cliff falling into the sea. The surviving structures are built upon stone stacks. King Hor of the Iron Islands murdered the sons of Bernard Justman, King of the Trident, at Pike while they were his hostages. Did you know in the books, Tyrion wanted to sleep with Sansa on their wedding night, but Sansa asked him not to. Unlike in the show, Tyrion and Sansa get fully undressed and enter bed, and Tyrion gropes Sansa's breast. Although she does not explicitly say no, he realizes that she does not wish to sleep with him, and he does not want to force himself upon her. When Sansa asks Tyrion what if she never wants him to touch her, he climbs out of bed and doesn't answer with, "And so my watch begins," or falls down drunk. Neither Shay nor anyone else checks Tyrion and Sansa's bed for stains of maidenhood blood. However, rumor spreads around, probably by Sansa's maids, all of whom are Cersei spies, that Tyrion has not consummated his marriage. In the books, Sansa and Tyrion never have the friendly banter like we saw in the show. Did you know in the books, we actually have no descriptions of Aemon's physical appearance? However, we do know he was a great swordsman, and that at birth, he was said to be half the size of his older brother, Aegon, though twice as fierce. In the books, it was actually at the age of 10 when Aemond lost his right eye during a fight with his nephew, Lucas Valerion. Subsequently, Aemond took to putting a sapphire in place of his missing eye. However, Aemond was also known to wear an eye patch over his sapphire eye at times. Apparently, he did this when he was in open court and he did not want to frighten noble ladies with his scars, such as when he was in the Round Hall of Storm's End with Boris Baratheon's wife and daughters. As a young man, Aemond wore night black armor chased with gold. Did you know in the books, Brienne is very unattractive in appearance and considered hard to look at? She is tall, muscular, flat-chested, and ungainly, with long shoulder-length, brittle straw-colored hair and broad, coarse features that are covered in freckles. Brienne's teeth are prominent and crooked. Her mouth is wide, her lips are swollen, and her nose has been broken more than once. She has large, beautiful blue eyes though, but her fingers are thick and calloused. When asked about her height, George R.R. Martin replied, "Brienne is well over 6 feet tall, but not close to 7. Just off the top of my head, I would say Brienne is taller than Renly and Jaime, and significantly heavier than either, but nowhere near the size of Gregor Clegane, who is the true giant in the series. Shorter than Hodor and the Greatjon, and the Hound. Maybe roughly the same height as Robert." Did you know in the books, Tyrion is really evil and threatens to beat and force himself upon Tommen? So, for context, Tommen is moved out of King's Landing to Castle Roseby, north of King's Landing long before Stannis arrives, but is captured by Tyrion's sellswords. When Cersei captures who she thinks is Tyrion's whore, Aelia, not Ross, who does not exist in the books, Tyrion threatens to harm Tommen if Cersei harms Aelia, and says what is done to her, he will do to Tommen by himself. So, even though the scene ends with Tyrion having the upper hand, Tyrion gets nothing out of this exchange except ensuring that Cersei would not rest until he is dead, which is what eventually happens. Obviously, Tyrion didn't mean it, but still, what advantage or benefit did this threat have? Because it wasn't to protect Aelia. He seemed to only do it to humiliate and frighten Cersei, which is so stupid. Did you know in the books, Khal Drogo had copper-colored skin, black hair, and black eyes. He is tall and muscular and moves gracefully. He has a long, drooping moustache and a long braid hung with tiny bells that hangs down to his thighs, symbolizing his status among the Dothraki as an undefeated warlord. Drogo's favorite horse is a lean red stallion, unnamed, as it is not a Dothraki custom to give individual names to animals. Drogo's father was Khal Barbo. Kaholo was pledged to the Khal Barbo's son while he was still a child, and saved young Drogo's life from sellswords on one occasion. From an early age, Drogo was an extremely gifted warrior, even among the fierce Dothraki. Before the age of 30, he led a Khalasar 40,000 strong, the largest on the Dothraki Sea. He has never been defeated in battle. Kaholo, Kotho, and Hago serve him as blood riders. Did you know in the books, Helaena was very different to her show counterpart? At the age of 13, Helaena was plumper than most Targaryens and less striking as well. Nonetheless, she was a pleasant and happy girl, and all agreed she would be an excellent mother. As queen, Helaena was loved by the small folk. By the age of 12, Helaena had become a dragon rider and rode the dragon Dreamfire. She married her brother at 13, and barely a year after her wedding, she gave birth to twins, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera. She is never described as being strange or speaking cryptically. However, like in the show, when King Varys held a feast to celebrate his recovery, it is Mushroom who reports that after the king had left the feast, Helena's nephew asked her for a dance, which her husband and brother, Aegon, took offense to. Did you know in the books, the others are tall and gaunt, with flesh pale as milk? They have cold blue eyes that have been described as burning like ice, or being as bright as blue stars. Others have pale blue blood and shiny bones like milk glass. The others wear delicate, reflective camouflaging armor that shifts in color with every step. According to the comic book artist Tommy Patterson, Martin told him that the reflective camouflaging armor is able to pick up the images of the things around it like a clear, still pond. The others appear to be superior swordsmen wielding thin crystal swords. The pale swords are extremely sharp, capable of moving through ringmail as if it is silk. When the sword touches a steel blade, only a high, thin sound similar to an animal screaming in pain can be heard and shatters the opposing steel blade. Did you know in the books, Melisandre is regarded as a beautiful woman? She has long hair the color of deep, burnished copper, unsettling red eyes, and pale, unblemished skin. The priestess is slender, graceful, and taller than most knights. Melisandre has full breasts, a narrow waist, and a heart-shaped face. Melisandre speaks the speech of a shy, High Valyrian, as well as the common tongue of Westeros. As is the custom of the red priests of her faith, Melisandre always dresses in long red fabric. She wears blood-red fabric underneath a silk gown the color of bright fire on one occasion, and robes of scarlet satin and blood velvet on another. The priestess also wears a scarlet cloak. She is never without a red gold choker containing a ruby which fits tightly around her neck. The priestess claims to never be cold despite weather conditions, and she gives off notable heat. Did you know in the books, each of Daenerys' dragons look completely different, whereas in the show, they all looked pretty similar. For example, Drogon's scales are black, his horns and spinal plates are blood red, and his eyes are smoldering red pits. His flame is black fire shot with red. He bleeds black blood. Meanwhile, the majority of Viserion scales are cream, but his horns, wing bones, and spinal crest are gold-colored. His claws are black and sharp. Although his true color is cream, he is often referred to as the White Dragon. His blood glows gold and red. Lastly, Rhaegal is a green and bronze dragon. His dark scales and wings are jade green, and his eyes are described initially as molten gold and later as bronze. His dragon flame has been described as being orange and yellow fire shot through with veins of green. Did you know in the books, Jaime says there are only 2 fighters in Westeros that could maybe defeat him, and from this we can ascertain 3 likely candidates he is talking about. The first is Barristan the Bold, since even at over 60, he is one of Westeros' best fighters. However, Jaime is also pretty arrogant and might discount Barristan's experience with his youth. So the next most likely candidate is the Hound, since Jaime would have seen firsthand how good Sandor is in the melee and tourney lists, to know how much of a threat he is. So the first spot is probably between Barristan and the Hound, but the final spot would obviously be the Mountain, since Jaime would be an idiot not to consider him. Now, this list obviously didn't include Arthur Dayne, since he is presumed dead, and Oberyn Martell, since Jaime has never seen him fight. Did you know in the books, Aeria Targaryen, once heir to the Iron Throne under Jaehaerys, suffered the most excruciating death imaginable. When she tried to ride Balerion, the Black Dread, the old dragon flew her back to Old Valyria, where she disappeared for months, only to return with horrific worms that had faces inside of her. It seems the creatures were keeping her alive so they could continue to consume her, and once she was put in an ice bath, her heart stopped as the creatures that survived the doom of Valyria shot out of her. However, even Balerion, the largest and most powerful dragon in all of Targaryen history, barely survived Valyria with terrible injuries caused by something even worse than a 126 feet long and 453 feet wide fire-breathing dragon. And this is why no one travels to Old Valyria. Did you know in the books, the wall stretches for 300 miles and is approximately 700 feet tall? It is made of solid ice, stone, and earth, and can be seen for miles around. It appears grey or blue, depending on the weather and time of day. The top is wide enough for a dozen mounted knight to ride abreast, and it is thicker at the base. The wall is straight, like a sword from Castle Black to Eastwatch by the Sea, but runs like a snake between Castle Black and the Shadow Tower. The Knights Watch raised 19 castles to guard the 100 leagues of the wall, although they never manned more than 17 at one time. Over the last 300 years, as the manpower of the watch has dropped, the top of the wall is studded with catapults, cranes, and trebuchets, but most have been dismantled for repair and never reassembled after being frozen in ice. Did you know in the books, Jon Snow estimates Samwell to weigh 20 stone, which is 127 kilograms or 280 pounds. So after Sam was born, he was the heir to Horn Hill. Then Sam's mum bore her husband 3 girls in 3 consecutive years before giving birth to Samwell's brother, Dickon, who showed all the physical vigor that Samwell lacked, and Randall's attentions turned to raising his more promising, younger son to take his place. For a time, Sam was left to enjoy his music, food, and other soft pursuits, though Randall forbade Samwell from traveling to Oldtown to study at the Citadel, horrified at the notion of a member of House Tarly wearing a maester's chain. To discourage the boy, Randall had Sam chained to the wall for 3 days. However, at 15, Randall then decided he wanted Dickon to be his heir and sent Sam to the wall. Did you know in the books, Ellaria Sand is not a bloodthirsty psychopath who is also a hypocrite, unlike her show counterpart? So, in the books, Ellaria is not regarded as a beautiful woman, but eye-catching with an exotic, sensuous flair. She has black hair and sultry skin. She is described as good, strong, and brave, with a gentle heart. However, Olenna Tyrell disparages Ellaria as the Serpent's Whore because of how Oberyn crippled her grandson, Willis. Now, in the books, Ellaria does not seek revenge against Marcilla, ever, and instead advocates against war with the Iron Throne to the Sand Snakes. She also has 4 daughters of her own with Oberyn, who are all quite young. She is part of the anti-war faction with Doran, but there are theories she is secretly conspiring against Doran, but not in the stupid way she did in the show. Did you know in the books, the Red Keep is made of pale red stone and has 7 massive drum towers crowned with iron ramparts. The castle is smaller than Winterfell and has massive curtain walls surrounding the castle. The Red Keep has serpentine steps with Maegor's Holdfast, the small council chambers, the Tower of the Hand, a small courtyard, and the black cells located below the steps. The Great Hall with the throne room is found above the steps, and the outer yard, or ward, is found near the main gate. The Great Yard can be seen from the windows of the Tower of the Hand. Above the steps are the Godswood and Riverwalk, while the Royal Sept and the Maiden Vault are located above the Serpentine Steps as well. The Red Keep is full of cats, including pets and strays, like a black tomcat that bit Tywin Lannister and frightens Tommen. Did you know in the books, Viserys was a peaceful man who hated conflict, kind of like King Robert, which is how George R.R. Martin originally wrote Viserys. He was described as plump, amicable, open-handed, and eager to please. Though Viserys was never considered strong-willed, he was not indecisive either. When he made a choice, he was unwavering. King Viserys' generosity was legendary like Robert, and the Red Keep became a place of song and splendor during his reign. He hosted countless balls, feasts, and tournaments. Viserys was well loved by lords and small folk alike. Lastly, like Robert, in his midlife, Viserys' stoutness caused him numerous health problems. Towards the end of his life, his girth nearly kept him from ascending the steps to the Iron Throne. Viserys sported a bushy, silver-gold moustache and wore the crown of Jaehaerys Targaryen. Did you know, in the books, there is quite a bit of cannibalism in Westeros? For example, on the island of Skargos, where Rickon is with Osha, cannibalism is believed to be quite common. Next is the Ice River clans north of the Wall, who are said to consume human flesh when there are no fish to hunt. A famous Andal legend called the Rat Cook tells the story of Tywell II, who ate his own son after the cook killed the prince in revenge for a wrong the king supposedly did to him. The king was unaware of this, however, as he ate and praised the taste of the pie. He asked for a second piece. Next, Danielle Loston, Lady of Harrenhal, was rumoured to preside over feasts of human flesh and bathe in the blood of virgins to keep her youth. Did you know in the books, Oberyn is a tall, slender, and graceful man and has a lined, salty face with thin eyebrows, black viper eyes, and a widow's peak nose. His hair is lustrous and black with only a few silver streaks. Oberyn is a renowned warrior and has a fearsome reputation throughout Westeros. According to Lord Tywin Lannister, he has always been half mad. Oberyn despises Lord Mace Tyrell, calling him the fat flower of Highgarden. In his youth, Oberyn and Elia visited Castle Rock, where they arrived shortly after the death of Joanna Lannister. According to Oberyn, his mother and Joanna had planned to wed either Oberyn to Cersei Lannister or Elia to Jaime Lannister, or both. Lord Tywin Lannister, however, was unreceptive of the suggestion, stating that his daughter would marry Prince Rhaegar Targaryen only for Oberyn's sister to marry him instead. Which is the most populated kingdom in Westeros at the start of A Game of Thrones? Well, George gives no specific numbers, but Elio Garcia, who helped George write Fire and Blood, has extrapolated some methods of figuring out the population by military size. For example, the North can muster 40,000 men, so using his and Merthead's numbers, the North has a population of about 4 million. So if we apply this methodology to the other 6 kingdoms, here are the numbers we get. The Westerlands has a population of 5.5 million. The Riverlands, like the North, has 4 million. The Stormlands is 2.5 to 3 million. The Vale has a population of 4 million also. The Reach has a whopping 10 to 12 million, whereas Dorne only has 3 million. The Iron Islands has 1.5 to 2 million, and lastly the Crown Lands has 1.5 million. Did you know in the books, Lyanna is described very differently depending on who you ask? Maester Yandel describes her as a wild and boyish young thing. Kevin Lannister recalls Lyanna as having a wild beauty about her. According to Ned, Lyanna has been a child woman of surprising loveliness and says Arya, with her brown hair, long face, and grey eyes, resemble Lyanna in appearance the most. Marjorie Tyrell is believed by Renly to resemble Lyanna, though Ned disagrees. Cersei is described by some as more beautiful. Lyanna is said to have the wolf blood by her father, Rickard Stark. Eddard suggests that Lyanna probably would have carried a sword if their father had allowed it. Lyanna is noted to have been a skilled rider who loved to ride. According to Harwin of Winterfell, Lyanna rode like a Northman, and Roose Bolton states that Lyanna was half a horse herself. Did you know in the books, Catelyn Stark believes Ashara Dayne to be the mother of Jon Snow? Ashara was a young, beautiful, tall, and fair maiden with haunting violet eyes. Her long dark hair tumbled around her shoulders. She was the sister of Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, and House Dayne comes from Dawn. According to Sir Barristan Selmy, Daenerys Targaryen's eyes resemble Ashara's eyes. Ashara was a lady-in-waiting to Princess Elia Martell, the wife of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. She was present at the tourney at Harrenhal, where she danced with Prince Oberyn Martell, Lord John Connington, and after Brandon Stark approached her on behalf of his younger brother Eddard, Ashara danced with Eddard as well. According to Illyria Dane, Ashara's younger sister, Ashara and Eddard Stark fell in love at Harrenhal. Sir Barristan Selmy was also in love with Ashara. Did you know in the books, Rhaegar was beautiful? He had deep purple eyes, taller than his brother Viserys, and hair similar to the silver blonde of Daenerys. Rhaegar owned knight black plate armor with the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen decorated in rubies on its breastplate. Rhaegar was an intelligent young man who excelled at anything to which he put his mind, and grew to be a great knight and a skilled musician. However, people said that Rhaegar loved his silver-stringed harp more than he loved his lance. Jorah Mormont, who described Rhaegar as valiant, honourable, and noble, while Barristan Selmy has called him determined, deliberate, dutiful, and single-minded. The Crown Prince was said to have been uninterested in the play of other children as a boy, but bookish to a fault. However, Rhaegar was deeply affected by the shadow of Summerhall because he was born in grief. Did you know in the books, Robert Baratheon had a bastard daughter in the Vale who became Sansa's friend, Maya Stone? Maya is a tall, strapping young woman with coal-black hair, cut short, and deep blue eyes like Robert. She avoids dresses and wears leather instead. She is 17 or 18 years old. A young Robert fathered Maya on a commoner while he and Eddard Stark were being fostered in the Vale by Jon Arryn. Lyanna Stark became less enthusiastic about her betrothal to Robert because of Maya. Robert often brought Ned along during his daily visits to see Maya, even after he lost interest in her mother. At some point after the birth of Joffrey, Robert expressed interest in bringing Maya to court in King's Landing. Queen Cersei Lannister did not protest, but stated that harm would come to her. Robert grew enraged enough to strike his wife, but did not press the point. Did you know in the books, Danielle Lothstone, known as Mad Danielle, was the Lady of Harrenhal and the head of House Lothstone during the reigns of King Aerys I and Maekar Targaryen. Danielle had long red hair and wore tight-fitting black armor. A story told to misbehaving children said that on moonless nights, giant bats would fly from Harrenhal and take the bad children back to Mad Danielle for her cookpots. Other stories were told about Mad Lady Lothstone bathing in blood and presiding over feasts of human flesh. When Lord Brendan Rivers, the hand of the king to Aerys I Targaryen, marched on Whitehalls to quash the secondary Blackfyre Rebellion, Lady Danielle was among the River Lords who came in support, marching in great strength. Lady Danielle turned to the black arts during the reign of Maekar I Targaryen, causing madness and chaos and the downfall of the Lothstone line. Did you know in the books, Daemon's girlfriend Mysaria had skin pale as milk? She was thin and graceful in her youth, but age thickened her body. Because of her appearance and reputation, Mysaria was dubbed Misery, the White Worm, by enemies and rivals. While a dancing girl in King's Landing, Mysaria became the favored lover of Daemon Targaryen. Around 105 AC, Mysaria became pregnant with Daemon's child while living at Dragonstone. Daemon gave his paramour a dragon egg for the child, which angered King Viserys Targaryen. The king ordered Daemon to return the egg and send Mysaria back to Lys. On her return to the Free City, she lost the child during a storm on the Narrow Sea. In the show, Mysaria's supposed pregnancy at Dragonstone is presented as a lie that Daemon made up. Did you know in the books, both Ned Stark and Cersei Lannister believe that if Robert finds out about the incest, he will kill Joffrey, Marcella, and Tommen? However, all the book evidence suggests that he probably wouldn't have done that. Here's why. Robert never ordered assassins to kill Viserys until after Daenerys married Khal Drogo. Renly even says that he should have been killed years ago, but the final decision lay with Robert, and he chose not to. Tywin killed Elya's children belonging to Prince Rhaegar since he probably knew Robert didn't have the stomach to order it himself. And even when Robert ordered the assassination of Daenerys in a fit of rage while all his council was telling him to do it, he later regretted that decision and told Ned to call it off. King Robert might have been a brute, but he didn't kill children. Did you know in the books, Littlefinger is deliberately bankrupting the realm because Robert can't possibly be responsible for the amount of debt the crown has accumulated? The Hand's Tourney, which is stated to be unbelievably extravagant, costs 100,000 gold dragons, but the crown is in debt for 6 million dragons. In order to get 6 million in debt in 15 years, Robert would have had to have a Hand's Tourney level expense every 3 months, and that's assuming the crown has no incomes. We know that the crown wasn't in debt when Robert took over, so what's going on? Well, Littlefinger knows that he needs to make himself irreplaceable, and he does this in 2 ways: putting the crown in incredible debt and yet always having money for the crown to use when asked. So no one knows where all the money is except Littlefinger. Did you know in the books, there is a theory that Benjen Stark was forced to take the black because he didn't tell Ned that Lyanna ran away with Rhaegar and kept it a secret. So if Benjen had told either Ned or their older brother Brandon wouldn't have gone to King's Landing demanding the return of his sister, which ultimately led to the death of Brandon and their father, and caused Robert's rebellion, which killed tens of thousands of people, because it is strange for Ned's only remaining brother to be left at the wall when there are plenty of better futures he could have chosen from. We also never see Ned and Benjen interact even once in the books, which could be interpreted that the brothers do not get along, despite both being pretty honorable guys. And Ned didn't know Benjen didn't want Jon to join the Night's Watch so young. Did you know in the books, Maegor was an imposing figure, more formidable than his father, Aegon the Conqueror. His physique was akin to that of a bull with broad shoulders, a thick neck, and immensely powerful arms. His grooming was precise, maintaining short hair and a neatly trimmed beard that followed his jawline. His face bore an air of perpetual anger, with suspicious eyes and a scowling mouth. Maegor was a natural-born warrior, unrivaled in his mastery of weapons. His existence was dedicated to the pursuit of war, tournaments, and battle, which propelled him to become one of the youngest and most distinguished knights of his era. He resolved all matters through force, subscribing to the principle that might makes right. Although he maintained numerous companions in his youth, he forged no genuine friendships, and even as an adult, his trust extended only to his mother Visenya. Did you know in the books, Robert Baratheon was massive? He was 6'6" and wielded a giant warhammer so large and heavy that not even Ned Stark could wield it. This explains how Robert was able to kill Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, who, by all accounts, was the greatest knight in all of Westeros, besides Sir Arthur Dayne, who had personally trained the young prince. Now, the battle between Robert and Rhaegar was pretty epic. They met first on horseback, riding into each other like a tourney, but with the Battle of the Trident raging on all around them. Rhaegar wounded Robert, but once on foot and fighting each other in single combat, Robert was able to deliver a single blow of his warhammer to Rhaegar's chest that caved in his lungs and killed him. His last words were of Lyanna. After that, the Targaryen host broke and ran. Did you know in the books, Bran time-traveled to visit Ned in the Godswood, but this was changed in the show to be the Tower of Joy so Jon's parentage could be set up for Season 6. This book evidence, plus the Hodor reveal, seem to confirm that Bran can time travel. However, what if to try and stop the White Walker invasion, a future Bran traveled back in time to investigate where the White Walkers came from, but then was captured by the Children of the Forest and was sacrificed to create the Night King? Because raising the dead is kind of similar to Bran's power of warging. This means the final battle between Arya and the Night King should have been between Jon and a future Bran as the Night King, meaning Jon has to kill his own little brother to stop the Long Night. Did you know in George's original outline, Winterfell was taken by Tyrion, not Theon Greyjoy, and this forced Catelyn Stark, Bran, and Arya to seek refuge at the Wall. But Jon and Benjen would not be able to help to Jon's anguish. This would lead to a bitter estrangement between Jon and Bran. Arya will be more forgiving until she realizes with terror that she has fallen in love with Jon, who is not only her half-brother, but a man of the Night's Watch, sworn to celibacy. Their passion would continue to torment Jon and Arya throughout the original trilogy, until the secret of Jon's true parentage is finally revealed in the last book. Abandoned by the Night's Watch, Catelyn and her children will travel further north, beyond the Wall, to find refuge. Did you know Michelle Fairley, who played Catelyn Stark in A Game of Thrones, was a replacement for Jennifer L., who was originally cast in the role and worked on the famously bad Game of Thrones pilot when it was first filmed in 2009, that the network did not like, so the only option was a total reshoot. Elle decided not to return because she'd just given birth to a daughter and felt like it was too soon to return to work, which is a shame because she is quite talented. Meanwhile, the original Daenerys actress was Tasmin Merchant, and she opted not to return either after the disastrous pilot episode because she said, "I was talked into it by some persuasive people. Then I found myself naked and afraid in Morocco and riding a horse that was clearly much more excited to be there than I was." Did you know, in George's original outline, Jaime was going to end up on the Iron Throne, kind of like how Cersei did in the TV show. George wrote in 1991, Tyrion Lannister will continue to travel, to plot, and to play the Game of Thrones, finally removing his nephew Joffrey in disgust at the boy king's brutality. Jaime Lannister will follow Joffrey on the throne of the Seven Kingdoms by the simple expedient of killing everyone ahead of him in line of succession and blaming his brother Tyrion for the murders. Exiled, Tyrion will change sides, making common cause with the surviving Starks to bring his brother down, and falling helplessly in love with Arya Stark while he's at it. His passion is alas unreciprocated, but no less intense for that, and it will lead to a deadly rivalry between Tyrion and Jon Snow. Did you know, in the books, the three-eyed crow might have been walking animals in order to bring Bran north of the Wall to meet him? For example, he might have warged the mother direwolf in episode 1 to give each of the Stark children a wolf to help control them, then warged Ghost to find the dead Night's Watch Rangers in order to spur the disastrous Great Ranging which would allow Sam to let Bran through the wall. The three-eyed crow might have also warged into the boar that killed King Robert to ignite the War of the Five Kings, since it was almost perfect timing for House Lannister to seize as many Starks as possible to force Robb to march south and leave Winterfell undefended, so Bran would be able to flee north of the Wall, which wouldn't have happened unless he was the only Stark in Winterfell. Did you know, in the books, Cersei, Arya, and Daenerys all have their heads shaved bald, and this was intentional by George. For example, Arya has her head shaved after her benevolent patriarch figure, Ned Stark, is killed in a failed coup, and she has to go into hiding with Yoren to avoid capture. Meanwhile, Daenerys has her hair burnt off when walking out of the funeral pyre after her benevolent patriarch figure, Khal Drogo, is killed by an infected wound. Lastly, Cersei has her head shaved after she loses the protection of her not-so-benevolent patriarch figure, Tywin Lannister. But George's idea in doing this is that patriarchy is great when the man on top is looking out for you. But should he die, it's not great for the women under his protection, and they have to strip their femininity in order to survive. Did you know, in the books, Robert nearly killed Joffrey as a boy? In Davos 6, we learn from Stannis that Joffrey butchered a cat. Stannis says, "Joffrey, I remember once, this kitchen cat. The cooks were wont to feed her scraps and fish heads. One told the boy that she had kittens in her belly, thinking he might want one. Joffrey opened up the poor thing with a dagger to see if it were true. When he found the kittens, he brought them to show his father. Robert hit the boy so hard, I thought he'd killed him." After this, Cersei threatened to kill Robert in his sleep if he ever struck Joffrey again, so he never did. But at the same time, it's clear in the books that Robert never got over it or forgave Joffrey. Did you know, in the show, it is hinted by actress Natalie Dormer that Marjorie is not a virgin through her interactions with Tommen and Sansa when the topic comes up. However, in the books, Marjorie is only 15, and even though Cersei accuses Marjorie of adultery, she is undecided on the matter. When Marjorie and her cousins' hymens, or maidenheads, are revealed to be broken, Cersei thinks to herself, I do hope the little queen and her cousins enjoyed those rights of theirs, which is a common occurrence for highborn girls. So Cersei doesn't really care whether Marjorie is or isn't a virgin, so long as she can diminish the young queen's power without reducing her own. However, it is hard to believe that Renly didn't even at least try to get Marjorie pregnant when they were married. However, It would be ironic if Marjorie were guilty of the charges against her. Did you know in the books, John thinks about Catelyn Stark more than his own Lord Father when it comes time to accept Stannis' offer to become a Stark? I could be the Lord of Winterfell, my father's heir. It was not Lord Eddard's face he saw floating before him though, it was Lady Catelyn's, with her deep blue eyes and hard cold mouth. She was looking at him, the way she used to look at him at Winterfell, whenever he had bested Robb at swords, or sums, or most anything. Who are you? That look had always seemed to say. This is not your place. Ironically, Catelyn might be more responsible for making Jon honor-obsessed than Ned, since Jon thinks about his bastardy all the time, and the person most responsible for reminding Jon of his bastardy would have been Catelyn, not Ned or any of his half-siblings, except maybe Sansa.
Jaehaerys Targaryen ruled the Seven Kingdoms for 55 years after the reign of Maegor the Cruel had ended. If we had to pick one character who most resembles Jaehaerys, it would be Aemond, because Jaehaerys was a younger brother who was more suited to the throne than his older brother, a deadly swordsman, and rode the largest dragon after Maegor's death. No one challenged his reign because he always made a point of never showing weakness. However, this would lead to the unfortunate death of most of his daughters, indirectly through his own actions. And he was the one who called a great council to decide his succession, because he did not want Rhaenys to be queen after him. So in calling a great council, he knew precisely who the lords of the realm would choose, something King Viserys chose not to do. Did you know, in the books, Criston Cole might be the father of Rhaenyra's eldest son, Jace? The show also hints at the possibility by giving Jace straight brown hair, while his two younger brothers, Luke and Joffrey, have curly brown hair that is similar to Harwin Strong. We also never see Rhaenyra drink the moon tea she was given at the end of episode 4, and it seems as though Rhaenyra marries Laenor shortly thereafter, meaning she might have been pregnant with Jace during episode 5. The evidence from the book has Harwin Strong breaking his collarbone right around the same time Rhaenyra gets pregnant with Jace, and right around the time Criston Cole asks Rhaenyra to run away with him.
Did you know in the books, Maester Luwin conspired to send Jon Snow to the Wall? In Catelyn 2, Ned and Catelyn are discussing what to do with Jon when Ned travels south with Robert. Catelyn refuses to house Jon, but Ned can't take Jon with him to court. They are at a crossroad, but then Luwin interjects with this: "Another solution presents itself. Your brother Benjen came to me about Jon a few days ago. It seems the boy aspires to take the Black. However, as we know, Benjen does not want Jon to join the Night's Watch so young, and Luwin blatantly lies in order to take advantage of the situation to have Jon sent to the Wall. This seems to show that even the maesters we like and trust might have their own secret agenda. Maybe the maesters know of Jon's true parentage." Did you know in the books, the Hound looks way more terrifying? The burnt side of his face is gaunt like a skull, with sharp cheekbones and a heavy brow. Slick black flesh is pocked with craters and deep cracks that ooze red and wet. His ear is only a hole with a stump, and a hint of bone shows on his jaw. The scars extend down to his throat. There is a twisted mass of scars around his eye, which is still good, not harmed by the fire, but he has no lips on that side. Sandor brushes his hair so that it covers his burnt side, since no hair grows there. Sandor speaks in a rough, rasping voice and has a laugh like the snarling of dogs in a pit. The burnt corner of his mouth twitches when he speaks.
Did you know in the books, Sunspear is a walled settlement protected by 3 massive winding walls, encircling one another and containing miles of narrow alleys, hidden courts, and noisy markets. The threefold gate, where the gates are lined up one behind the other, avoids the labyrinth, instead allowing straight passage on a brick path to the old palace. One of Sunspear's chief structures is the original stronghold of House Martell, the Sand Ship, which is a large, ugly, dun-coloured building that looks like a Drummond. The Sand Ship was the ancient keep of House Martell, minor Dornish lords. When Nymeria arrived in Dorne with the 10,000 ships of the Rhoynar, possibly around 700 years before Aegon's conquest, she wed Lord Maurice Martell, the Lord of the Sandship. This alliance of the Martells with the Rhoynar led to the unification of Dorne in Nymeria's war.
Did you know, in the books, Ned planned to privatize the abandoned castle on the wall and give them to men who would restore them, pay taxes to the Night's Watch, and protect against wildling raiders? Jon remembers his Lord Father had once talked about raising new lords and settling them in the abandoned holdfasts as a shield against wildlings. His uncle Benjen believed the Lord Commander could be won around, so long as the new lordlings paid taxes to Castle Black rather than Winterfell. It is a dream for spring, though, Lord Eddard had said. If winter had come and gone more quickly, and spring had followed its turn, I might have been chosen to hold one of these towers in my father's name, Jon thought. So Jon could have been a lord of one of these castles, which sounds way better than joining the Night's Watch. Did you know, in the books, Tyrion is really not a good guy? For example, when he talks to that working girl in episode 3, season 5, and she says that she's not pretty enough, and Tyrion makes her feel better, so she agrees to sleep with him without paying. But he refuses. That's not what happens in the books. Instead, Tyrion has no reservations and in fact describes her as half a corpse, which he sleeps with, throws up and notices her back is crisscrossed with scars, says to himself, "This girl is as good as dead. Even her eyes look dead." He tells her to kill him and bring his head to King's Landing, but she doesn't understand. So he shoves her legs apart, crawls between them, and takes her once more. That much she could comprehend, at least.
In the books and show, Baelon attacking Robb is probably one of the most stupid decisions he could have made, since he thinks the Lannisters will let him be king of the Iron Islands and parts of the north afterwards. However, Tywin even says to let Baelon keep fighting the north, and when both sides are exhausted, they'll strike and reclaim both kingdoms for the Iron Throne. However, had Baelon just attacked Castle Rock with Robb Stark, they could have carved the Westerlands in two between them. Tywin would have had to march west to stop them, and Stannis would have taken King's Landing. The Tyrells probably wouldn't have allied with such a weak Tywin, and House Lannister would have lost, with the Greyjoys getting the entire coast of the Westerlands for themselves. Or even not attacking and letting Robb keep fighting and exhaust the north would have been a better plan.
Did you know, in the books, after Jorah's inappropriate advance, which included a forced kiss, Daenerys finds herself overwhelmed by a sense of loneliness and betrayal. She seeks comfort in the arms of Irri, and the Dothraki handmaiden willingly fulfills her Khaleesi's desires. Regrettably, despite Irri's eagerness to please, Daenerys finds herself burdened by guilt for reducing her loyal handmaiden to a mere object of pleasure. Irri is described as possessing copper-coloured skin, black hair, and almond-shaped eyes. She and Jiqui are a similar age to Daenerys, though Irri possesses a slimmer physique compared to Jiqui. Interestingly, both handmaidens pursue Ricaro and argue over him. Jiqui to Irri, "You are too skinny for him. You are almost a boy. Ricaro does not bed with boys. This is known." Irri to Jiqui, "It is known that you are almost a cow. Ricaro does not bed with cows." Did you know, in the books, Jon Snow didn't have the best opinion of Robb? For example, when Robb was walking with Myrcella at the welcoming feast in A Game of Thrones, Jon noticed the shy looks she gave Robb. He decided she was insipid. Robb didn't even have the sense to realize how stupid she was. He was grinning like a fool. Next, Jon feels resentment for when they were playing as kids and Jon called out he was Lord of Winterfell, and Robb stopped playing to say, "You can't be Lord of Winterfell, you're bastard born. My lady mother says you can't ever be the Lord of Winterfell." And when Stannis offers for him to become Jon Stark, he thinks to himself, he wanted it. Jon knew then, he wanted it as much as he had ever wanted anything. "I have always wanted it," he thought guiltily.
Did you know, in the books, George R.R. Martin has always made it clear that Westeros is based on real medieval history. So here are 10 of the most obvious references. The wall is clearly meant to be Hadrian's Wall, built by the Romans, which means the wildlings are clearly meant to be the Scots. Aegon the Conqueror is definitely William the Conqueror. The First Men and Andals are meant to be the native Britons and Anglo-Saxons. The Ironborn are the Vikings. The war between the Starks and Lannisters is a parallel to the war between the Yorks and Lancasters. The Red Wedding is reminiscent of the Black Dinner that occurred in Scotland. Cersei Lannister is based on Margaret of Anjou, both in terms of beauty and cunning, which means Joffrey is based on Eddard of Lancaster. However, he is also very similar to Richard II of England, who was a cruel boy king like Joffrey.
Did you know, in the books, Brienne comes to respect Podrick Payne very quickly, whereas in the show, Brienne seems to constantly mistreat and dislike him, which is such a shame because in the books, their relationship is great and climaxes with Brienne refusing to bring Jaime Lannister to Lady Stoneheart to be hung. So the Brotherhood without banners prepare to hang Brienne, which she accepts. Brienne's companion, Hyle Hunt, yells and fights back. However, when she sees Podrick not even put up a fight as they hang him, she abandons her oath to Lady Catelyn and calls for a sword in order to save Podrick's life. And the last we see of Brienne is her leading Jaime away from his army towards the dense woods. But it's doubtful she'll just hand him over to die, and instead probably has a plan. Did you know, in the books, Littlefinger has orchestrated for Sansa to get the veil by marrying Harry the Heir, who was an arrogant young knight that will inherit the Eyrie should Robert Arryn die? This is because everyone thinks Sansa is Littlefinger's daughter, and whoever marries her will inherit Harrenhal. However, the real endgame is to orchestrate Robert's death so Harry can replace him, and at their wedding night, Sansa will reveal her Stark and Tully colours, only for all of the Vale to pledge her their swords to win back her birthright. However, in A Song of Ice and Fire, an unannounced plan never comes into fruition, so something will probably happen to spoil this. For example, Harry has 2 bastard daughters, and even though Sansa has been able to seduce Harry, it remains to be seen if he will be a useful ally for Sansa. Did you know, in the books, Sandor Clegane is still believed to be dead, but like the show, it is hinted that he has forsaken his identity as the Hound to live a peaceful life on the Quiet Isle where Brienne encounters his horse, Stranger. Even though the show brought him back to have a final showdown with his brother in the final episode, Clegane Bowl was strangely disappointing and lacked any meaningful resolution, with both of them just dying at the end of it. And it's not like the Hound was the only one who could kill Gregor, because Daenerys' Dragonfire was probably going to take care of him. Meanwhile, Sandor's book ending of a quiet and peaceful ending might actually be more in line with the message of A Song of Ice and Fire, and a better ending for such a tragic hero. Did you know, in the books, Catelyn was quite uncomfortable with marrying Ned since she had been betrothed to his taller and more handsome older brother, Brandon, who she had spent quite a bit of time getting to know, only for Brandon to demand the return of his sister and be executed by the Mad King. Suddenly Catelyn was married off to Ned to ensure the Tully alliance in the war against the Mad King. Catelyn describes it as she remembered her own childish disappointment. The first time she had laid eyes on Eddard Stark, she had pictured him as a younger version of his brother Brandon, but that was wrong. Ned was shorter and plainer of face, and so somber. He spoke courteously enough, but even when he took her maidenhood, their love had more of duty to it than of passion. Did you know, in the books, Daemon Targaryen never struggled to perform in the bedroom, unlike in the show, which is a bit dumb, because they make a big deal about how Daemon can't get it up with Rhae Royce, Mysaria, and a young Rhaenyra, only for it to completely go away after the time skip when Daemon fathers 2 daughters with Laena and 2 sons with Rhaenyra. Meanwhile, in the books, it is very likely that Rhae Royce was barren and given to Daemon for that express purpose so he would not be able to create any heirs like Maegor the Cruel. And Mysaria did get pregnant with Daemon's child in the books, which the show undid. So it was a really weird thing to add, and then completely forget about, with no explanation or resolution for why. Did you know, in the books, Jaime never cheated on Cersei, as he told Catelyn in their conversation together when he brings up Ned's infidelity, but excluding Robert, which Jaime knew about, how many times did Cersei cheat on Jaime? Well, the first time was with Lancel, after Jaime was captured by Robb. And that went on for most of A Clash of Kings. Next is Taena Merryweather, the Myrish beauty whose husband Cersei makes hand of the king. And lastly, the Kettle Black brothers. So we definitely know Cersei sleeps with Osney, since this occurs in one of her chapters. Tyrion also claims to Jaime that Cersei has been sleeping with Osmond during his escape, and Cersei claims to have slept with Osfrid to the High Sparrow. But we're not actually sure about that last one, since Cersei claims better to confess too much than too little. Did you know the old king from House of the Dragon forced his daughters to marry against their will? This caused the death of his daughter Daela, who was too frail to marry at 15 and died in childbirth. His next daughter, Viseria, was forced to marry an old man and so died while riding drunk on the streets of King's Landing. Next was Sarah, who slept with 3 knights outside of wedlock, so Jaehaerys sent her to be with the Silent Sisters, where she would not be allowed to speak and would spend her days cleaning the dead. So she escaped and lived in exile as a whore to get away from him. His last daughter committed suicide when she got pregnant out of wedlock. Lastly, Jaehaerys made sure Rhaenys did not ascend to the Iron Throne because of her gender. Did you know in the books, there is the mystery of who sent the direwolves? It is theorized that Bloodraven might have sent them to unlock the Stark children's warging abilities, since the direwolves greatly influence both the story and the Stark children. For example, Grey Wind wins Robb the battle at Oxcross. Summer saves Bran multiple times and awakens his third eye. Both Arya and Jon Snow have wolf dreams that influence their decisions. Shaggy Dog is the proof that Rickon is the true-born heir to Winterfell. And Lady's death helps awaken Sansa to the savagery at court. The mother direwolf, killed by a shattered antler, also convinces Catelyn to send her children away. All in all, the arrival of the direwolves might have allowed a powerful skin changer like Bloodraven to influence the Stark children through their pets.